Have you ever caught yourself trapped in an endless argument with yourself? You replay that awkward conversation from last week, overanalyze a tiny mistake, or convince yourself that everything is about to fall apart. And the worst part? It all happens inside your own head. Your inner voice can be your greatest ally or your worst enemy. It can hype you up like a coach before a championship game, or tear you down like the world's meanest critic. And here's the real kicker. Most people let their inner voice run wild, completely unchecked, like an untrained dog that drags them through the mud every single day. But what if you could take back control? What if, instead of being a prisoner to your thoughts, you could turn your inner dialogue into a weapon for strength, confidence, and unshakable mental clarity? This isn't just wishful thinking. The ancient Stoics, some of the greatest minds in history, knew how to master their inner world long before modern psychology even had a name for it. They understood something most people never realize. You don't have to believe everything you think. That little voice in your head, it's not always right. And if you don't learn to control it, it will control you. It will make you doubt yourself, second-guess your decisions, and steal your peace of mind. It will sabotage your confidence before you even step onto the battlefield of life. But here's the good news. You can rewire your mind, train your inner voice, and unlock a level of mental strength that 99% of people never reach. You can recognize when your inner voice is lying to you and learn how to stop it in its tracks. You can break free from the cycle of overthinking that keeps you up at night. You can transform your self-talk from an inner critic into an unstoppable source of motivation. And you can do all of this using powerful Stoic principles combined with modern techniques that are proven to work. By the time you're done with this video, you won't just understand how to silence negativity. You'll know how to use your mind as a fortress of strength, resilience, and clarity. Once you learn to master your inner voice, you'll never see yourself or the world the same way again. Before we dive into how to control your inner voice, you need to understand what it really is and why it has so much power over you. Most people go through life without ever questioning that voice in their head. It tells them who they are, what they can and can't do, and how they should feel about themselves and the world. And they listen. They accept every thought as truth, every fear as reality, and every criticism as a final verdict. But here's something most people never realize. That voice isn't you. It might sound like you, it might feel like the real you, but it is not. It is a collection of thoughts, emotions, past experiences, fears, and beliefs that have been shaped by your upbringing, society, and the people around you. It is influenced by everything you've ever been told, every failure you've experienced, and every insecurity you've absorbed. That voice is not always speaking truth. It is often just repeating what it has been trained to say. If you don't recognize this, you will live your entire life at its mercy, believing every self-doubt, every anxious thought, and every moment of fear as if they are facts. This internal dialogue is one of the most powerful forces in your life. It can either shape you into someone strong, confident, and resilient, or it can keep you trapped in cycles of hesitation, insecurity, and emotional instability. It affects everything: your emotions, your confidence, your decisions, and ultimately the life you create. Every success, every failure, every missed opportunity is, in some way, linked to how you speak to yourself internally. The problem is, most people never take the time to question where this voice comes from, whether it's serving them, or how they can take control of it. When you understand how your inner voice works, you gain something that few people ever will, the ability to separate yourself from it. And once you do that, you gain control over something that controls almost everyone else. This is the first step to mental strength. The ability to stand outside of your own thoughts, to see them objectively, and to decide what you will and won't accept as truth. Your inner voice is not just random noise. It has a purpose, and that purpose has been shaped over time by evolution, by psychology, and by personal experience. It exists because at some point it helped you survive. Your ancestors who constantly thought about potential dangers, who worried about whether they had enough resources, who second-guessed their decisions, those were the ones who avoided threats and stayed alive. This internal dialogue was meant to keep you alert, cautious, and aware of potential risks. But what was once a survival mechanism can now become a prison. The same thought process that kept early humans safe from wild animals now keeps modern humans stuck in cycles of stress, anxiety, and self-doubt. The mind is wired to focus more on danger than on success, more on what could go wrong than on what could go right. This is called negativity bias, and it's one of the main reasons people struggle with their inner voice. It's easier for the brain to replay failures than successes, to predict disasters rather than visualize triumphs. Your mind believes it's keeping you safe by constantly pointing out your weaknesses, reminding you of past mistakes, and warning you against anything uncertain. But instead of protecting you, it is often keeping you small. This is why many people feel stuck in life. Their thoughts hold them back before they even take action. The fear of embarrassment stops them from speaking up. The memory of a past failure prevents them from trying again. The doubt in their own ability keeps them from stepping into new opportunities. The mind is powerful, but it doesn't always work in your favor. If you do not take control of it, it will control you. The inner voice is not just about self-talk. It is the filter through which you experience life. Two people can face the same challenge, but their internal dialogue will determine how they respond. One person might say, "I've failed before, so I'll probably fail again," while the other says, "I've failed before, but I learned, so now I can do better." The event is the same. The experience is the same. The only difference is the conversation happening inside their head. One leads to hesitation, the other to resilience. This internal dialogue does not just influence emotions, it shapes confidence. The way you speak to yourself determines whether you build belief in yourself or destroy it. Confidence is not something people are born with. It's built, one thought at a time. Every time you tell yourself you are capable, that you can handle difficulty, that you are strong, you are reinforcing an identity of resilience. Every time you tell yourself you're not good enough, that you always mess up, that you never succeed, you're reinforcing an identity of failure. Over time, these thoughts turn into patterns, and those patterns turn into self-perception. Your self-image is not based on reality. It is based on repetition. If you tell yourself the same thing over and over, it will become your truth. A person who constantly repeats that they are bad at speaking in public will believe it, even if they have never actually tried. A person who constantly tells themselves they are socially awkward will act that way, even if no one else sees them that way. The more you say something to yourself, the more your brain will accept it as reality. This is why your inner voice is the foundation of all decision-making. The choices you make are a direct reflection of what you believe about yourself. If you think you are capable, you will take action. If you think you are unworthy, you will hesitate. The difference between people who take bold action and those who stay stuck in the same patterns is not intelligence, talent, or opportunity. It is the voice they listen to. The good news is that your inner voice is not fixed. It is not a permanent script that you are forced to follow for life. It can be changed. The way you speak to yourself can be reprogrammed, and the moment you realize this, you step into power that most people will never access. You have the ability to challenge your own thoughts, to question the narratives that hold you back, and to rewrite the way you communicate with yourself. You are not at the mercy of your emotions or your past experiences. You're not stuck with the same negative patterns forever. You can learn to recognize when your inner voice is working against you, and you can change it. This is the foundation of mental strength. It is not about suppressing emotions or pretending to be positive all the time. It is about understanding how your mind works so that you can take control of it, rather than letting it control you. It is about developing the ability to step back from your thoughts, to see them for what they are, just thoughts, not reality, and to choose which ones you accept. The Stoics understood this better than anyone. They knew that true power was not in controlling the outside world, but in mastering the inner world. They trained themselves to separate from their emotions, to view challenges with objectivity, and to speak to themselves in a way that built resilience rather than weakness. They did not allow fear to dictate their actions, nor did they allow negative thoughts to shape their reality. They saw their inner voice as a tool to be sharpened, not a dictator to be obeyed. And this is what you're going to learn. You're going to learn how to take control of your inner voice, how to rewire your thoughts, how to break free from patterns of self-doubt, and how to turn your mind into your greatest source of strength. You are going to learn how to use the same principles that have been practiced by some of the strongest minds in history, so that instead of being controlled by your thoughts, you become the one in control. The moment you realize that your inner voice is not an absolute truth, but a narrative shaped by past experiences, emotions, and conditioning, everything changes. Understanding that you have the power to challenge, refine, and even rewrite that voice is the first step. But knowing that your thoughts are not always facts is not enough. You also need to recognize when your inner voice is helping you and when it is harming you. Not all internal dialogue is bad. In fact, self-talk can be one of the most powerful tools for resilience, confidence, and clarity. It can push you forward in moments of doubt, help you regulate emotions under stress, and sharpen your decision-making in high-pressure situations. But there is a fine line between self-talk that strengthens you and internal chatter that weakens you. The challenge is in recognizing the difference before your thoughts spiral out of control. Self-talk is intentional. It is a dialogue with yourself that has a purpose, whether it is to motivate, reflect, or problem solve. It is structured, rational, and often solution-oriented. People who use self-talk effectively know how to regulate their emotions by speaking to themselves with clarity and discipline. When something goes wrong, instead of collapsing into emotional turmoil, they engage in self-talk that helps them process the situation, analyze solutions, and move forward. Chatter, on the other hand, is chaotic. It is the endless loop of thoughts that do not lead to resolution, but instead amplify stress, doubt, and hesitation. It is when the mind replays a mistake over and over, dissecting every detail as if that will change the past. It is when thoughts jump from one worry to another with no end, creating unnecessary mental noise. Chatter is what keeps people awake at night, consumed by hypothetical scenarios and worst-case outcomes. Unlike self-talk, which has direction and intention, Chatter is an uncontrolled storm of thoughts that offer no clarity, only confusion. The difference between the two is not just about content, but about control. Self-talk is a conversation you lead, while chatter is a conversation that controls you. One helps you process emotions, the other intensifies them. One creates solutions, the other creates problems that do not even exist. When people fail to recognize this difference, they become trapped in their own thoughts, mistaking over-analysis for reflection and rumination for problem-solving. Chatter often disguises itself as productive thinking, but it is nothing more than mental noise that drains energy. A person may believe that replaying a conversation repeatedly will help them gain insight, but in reality, it only deepens frustration. They may think that worrying excessively about the future will prepare them, but in truth, it only paralyzes action. The more one indulges in chatter, the more overwhelming life feels. Thoughts become tangled, making even simple decisions exhausting. One of the greatest dangers of chatter is that it creates emotional amplification. When negative thoughts are left unchecked, they intensify emotions. A single moment of embarrassment can turn into days of shame. A small setback can feel like a complete failure. A minor conflict can be exaggerated into a catastrophe. The more the mind fixates on a thought, the stronger the emotional response becomes. What starts as a simple concern escalates into anxiety, frustration, or even hopelessness. Self-talk, in contrast, is about regulation. It does not suppress emotions, but allows them to be processed in a way that maintains perspective. When something negative happens, self-talk acknowledges it, but does not let it spiral into unnecessary suffering. Instead of fueling emotional reactions, it works to calm them. Rather than letting fear dictate actions, it challenges fear with rational thought. When emotions start to cloud judgment, self-talk steps in as an internal guide, bringing clarity back into focus. Understanding this difference is not just about improving mental well-being, but about gaining mastery over thought patterns. Those who develop strong self-talk habits create mental environments where resilience thrives, while those who let chatter dominate their minds become prisoners of their own anxieties. The ability to shift from chatter to self-talk is what separates those who feel overwhelmed from those who remain composed under pressure. The key to controlling this shift is awareness. Most people are so used to their internal dialogue that they do not even question whether it is constructive or destructive. They assume that thinking is always helpful, without realizing that not all thoughts serve a purpose. By developing the ability to observe thoughts rather than automatically engaging with them, it becomes easier to recognize when the mind is spiraling into unproductive chatter. A crucial distinction between the two is the way they handle uncertainty. Self-talk is grounded in the present, addressing problems with a practical mindset. Chatter, however, thrives on speculation. It constantly asks, "What if?" in ways that do not lead to solutions, but rather to endless anxiety. When the mind becomes consumed with scenarios that have not even happened, stress is created out of thin air. The future becomes a source of fear rather than possibility. Another defining characteristic of chatter is its tendency to repeat. Unlike self-talk, which moves forward, chatter loops in circles. The same thoughts replay endlessly, never arriving at new conclusions. This is why chatter is so exhausting. It drains mental energy without providing any resolution. Self-talk, on the other hand, has momentum. It processes emotions and moves toward action rather than keeping the mind stuck in over-analysis. One of the most effective ways to shift from chatter to self-talk is through externalization. Thoughts become overwhelming when they stay locked inside the mind, but putting them into words, whether through speaking or writing, helps create distance. A problem that seems impossible to solve mentally often becomes clearer when articulated. This is why structured reflection, whether through journaling or intentional conversation, is a powerful tool for mental clarity. When thoughts remain unspoken, they multiply without order, but when they are expressed, they can be examined with logic rather than emotion. Another powerful method is reframing. Chatter often distorts reality by focusing only on negative aspects, while self-talk works to reframe situations in ways that restore balance. A rejection can be seen as a personal failure, or it can be reframed as an opportunity for growth. A difficult challenge can be seen as overwhelming, or it can be reframed as a chance to build resilience. The mind tends to default to the most emotionally charged interpretation, but with practice, it can be trained to shift perspective in ways that support mental strength rather than weaken it. One of the reasons chatter is so difficult to escape is that it thrives in stillness. When the mind is unoccupied, it fills the silence with mental noise. This is why overthinking is most common during idle moments, late at night, during long commutes, or in moments of solitude. One of the simplest yet most effective strategies to counteract this is movement. Physical activity interrupts looping thoughts by engaging the body and shifting focus. Even something as simple as a walk can break the cycle of mental repetition, giving thoughts the space to settle rather than spiral. The influence of the external environment on internal dialogue cannot be ignored. Surroundings shape thoughts, whether consciously or unconsciously. When the environment is filled with negativity, whether through toxic relationships, excessive media consumption, or constant stress, the mind absorbs that energy. Chatter thrives in environments of chaos, while self-talk is strengthened in environments of order. This is why it is crucial to be intentional about what is consumed mentally and emotionally. Just as a cluttered space creates distraction, a cluttered mental environment makes constructive self-talk difficult. Self-talk is a skill that can be developed. Like any discipline, it requires practice. The more conscious one becomes of internal dialogue, the easier it is to shift patterns from chatter to clarity. The key is not to eliminate all negative thoughts, but to prevent them from taking control. By recognizing when the mind is falling into destructive loops, it becomes possible to redirect focus toward thoughts that build confidence, resilience, and emotional stability. Understanding this difference is not just about mental clarity, but about taking back power. Those who master self-talk do not live at the mercy of their emotions. They do not allow doubt to paralyze them, nor do they let fear dictate their choices. They use their thoughts as tools for strength, not sources of suffering. They have trained themselves to respond to challenges with logic rather than panic, to setbacks with resilience rather than self-destruction, and to uncertainty with clarity rather than fear. Developing this ability is one of the most valuable mental skills a person can acquire. It is the foundation for emotional intelligence, decision-making, and personal growth. Those who refine their internal dialogue gain a level of self-control that most people will never experience. It is not about silencing emotions, but about managing them in a way that leads to wisdom rather than distress. It is about learning to use the mind as an ally rather than an enemy. Those who accomplish this gain a level of mental freedom that allows them to navigate life with clarity, strength, and unshakable confidence. The way you speak to yourself determines the life you live. Every thought, every belief, every internal dialogue either strengthens you or weakens you. There is no middle ground. Once you begin to recognize the difference between self-talk and destructive chatter, the next step is learning how to reshape those thoughts into something that fuels resilience rather than self-doubt. The truth is, most people are not defeated by external circumstances. They are defeated by the voice inside their head that tells them they are not good enough, that they always fail, that they will never be capable of real change. But the reality is, that voice is not truth. It is a habit. And like any habit, it can be broken and rebuilt into something stronger. Negative self-talk does not appear out of nowhere. It is the result of years of conditioning, past failures, societal expectations, and unconscious fears. It is often absorbed in childhood, reinforced through setbacks, and repeated until it becomes automatic. The mind, left unchecked, will always default to self-preservation, which means avoiding risks, focusing on mistakes, and fixating on everything that could go wrong. But what the mind sees as protection often becomes limitation. When negative self-talk takes control, it does not keep you safe, it keeps you small. It creates an invisible barrier between you and everything you are capable of becoming. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology existed. They knew that thoughts had the power to shape not only emotions, but also actions. They trained themselves to separate from destructive self-perception, to challenge their own assumptions, and to reframe adversity as an opportunity for growth rather than a reason for despair. The ability to master this process is not just about improving mental well-being. It is about building a mind that cannot be shaken, no matter what circumstances arise. Reframing negative self-talk begins with awareness. Most people do not even realize how often they tear themselves down. The words they say to themselves become so ingrained that they feel like objective reality rather than personal interpretation. Statements like, "I am terrible at this," "I will always be this way," or "I can never succeed," are not facts. They are stories, and any story can be rewritten. The first step is to catch these patterns in real time. The moment a self-defeating thought arises, pause. Look at it for what it is, a learned response, not an undeniable truth. Once awareness is developed, the next step is to challenge the validity of those thoughts. The Stoics had a practice of questioning their own assumptions, refusing to accept surface-level emotions as absolute. When a thought like "I'm not good enough" arises, they would examine it with logic. What evidence supports this claim? Is it true in every situation, or only in isolated moments? Has there ever been a time when the opposite was true? By forcing the mind to confront its own narratives, the emotional weight behind them begins to dissolve. A belief that goes unchallenged will always feel real. A belief that is questioned loses its power. Another essential part of reframing is shifting perspective. The way an event is interpreted determines its impact. A failure can be seen as a reflection of incompetence or as a lesson in resilience. A rejection can be seen as proof of worthlessness or as redirection towards something better. The event itself does not change, only the perception of it does. The Stoics mastered the ability to detach from immediate emotions and see the bigger picture. They understood that no single setback defines a person, no moment of weakness determines lifelong potential, and no temporary struggle has the power to break someone unless they allow it to. Language plays a crucial role in reframing self-talk. The words used internally shape identity and perception. A simple shift in phrasing can alter the entire emotional weight of a situation. Instead of saying "I failed," Shifting to "I am learning" changes the narrative from defeat to progress. Instead of "I am not good at this," replacing it with "I am improving every time I try," creates a mindset of growth rather than limitation. Words have power, and the way they are used internally will determine whether the mind becomes an ally or an enemy. The Stoics also emphasized emotional detachment from thoughts. They understood that not every internal reaction deserves attention. When negative self-talk arises, the goal is not to suppress it, but to step back from it. Observing a thought without attaching to it removes its influence. Instead of engaging with self-criticism, it can simply be acknowledged as noise. The mind generates countless thoughts every day. Most of them are meaningless. Learning to see them as passing clouds rather than absolute truths gives freedom from their control. Another effective technique in reframing negative self-talk is reinterpreting discomfort. The mind instinctively resists anything that feels difficult, associating discomfort with failure or inadequacy. But the Stoics saw difficulty as a sign of growth. Instead of viewing challenges as evidence of inability, they saw them as training. Struggle was not a reason to doubt oneself, but proof that progress was happening. Reframing negative thoughts about difficulty into thoughts of preparation builds resilience. Instead of "this is too hard for me," the mindset shifts to "this is making me stronger." Instead of "I am struggling," it becomes "I am developing." Building mental strength also requires changing the internal tone of self-talk. The way the mind speaks to itself affects emotional response. Harsh, critical tones create stress and hesitation. A more composed, constructive tone creates confidence. Speaking to oneself with the same patience and encouragement that would be given to a close friend allows for growth rather than self-destruction. The Stoics practiced self-discipline in their words, both spoken and unspoken. They avoided unnecessary harshness, not out of weakness, but because they understood that negativity does not create strength. Composure does. Another strategy for reframing self-talk is focusing on present action rather than past mistakes. The mind often fixates on what went wrong, replaying past failures and using them as proof of inadequacy. But dwelling on the past does not change it. The Stoics believed in directing energy toward what can be controlled, and the only thing that can be controlled is the present moment. Instead of engaging in self-talk about what should have been done differently, the focus shifts to what can be done now. Regret and guilt lose their power when they are replaced with action. Developing mental strength through reframing is not about forced positivity. It is not about pretending everything is fine or ignoring difficulties. It is about training the mind to process events in a way that strengthens rather than weakens. It is about choosing interpretations that build resilience instead of narratives that fuel self-doubt. The ability to control thoughts is the ability to control emotions, and the ability to control emotions is the foundation of mental strength. One of the most important lessons in reframing self-talk is learning to embrace imperfection. The mind often demands unrealistic standards, punishing itself for any perceived weakness. But perfection does not exist, and the pursuit of it only leads to frustration. The Stoics accepted human limitations, not as failures, but as natural conditions. They did not engage in self-talk that demanded flawlessness. They engaged in self-talk that encouraged perseverance despite flaws. Recognizing that setbacks, mistakes, and doubts are part of growth allows for self-talk that is constructive rather than self-destructive. Reframing negative self-talk is an ongoing practice. It is not something that happens instantly, but something that is trained over time. Every moment of self-awareness, every shift in perspective, every conscious decision to change an internal narrative builds mental strength. With consistency, negative self-talk loses its grip. It no longer has the power to dictate emotions, limit actions, or define identity. The Stoics did not allow their thoughts to control them. They mastered the art of controlling their thoughts. Mastering self-talk is mastering the self. The ability to turn self-criticism into self-discipline, fear into preparation, and doubt into action is the difference between those who remain trapped in their own minds and those who rise above their circumstances. Every person has the ability to train their mind, to reshape their internal dialogue, and to build a mental state that cannot be broken. Those who commit to this process gain a level of control over their lives that most will never experience, and the ones who master it become unstoppable. Reframing negative self-talk is a powerful skill, but mastering the mind requires something even deeper: the ability to step outside of thoughts altogether. Thoughts come and go, but the problem is, most people don't see them for what they are. They get pulled into every fear, every doubt, every frustration, as if thoughts were absolute truths rather than passing mental events. The strongest minds are not those who eliminate negative thoughts, but those who know how to see them without being consumed by them. This is the essence of mental distancing. Most people are too close to their thoughts. They identify with every emotion as if it defines who they are. When anxiety arises, they say, "I am anxious," rather than, "Anxiety is present in my mind right now." When self-doubt appears, they believe it is a reflection of their capabilities rather than a temporary reaction. The inability to separate from thoughts is what creates suffering. It is not the thoughts themselves that cause distress, but the attachment to them. The more a person fuses with their thoughts, the more they are controlled by them. Mental distancing is the practice of stepping back and observing thoughts rather than engaging with them. It is the ability to recognize a thought without believing it, to acknowledge an emotion without being ruled by it. The Stoics understood this well. They knew that emotions and thoughts were natural, but they also knew that reacting to them blindly led to unnecessary pain. Instead of suppressing emotions or being overwhelmed by them, they practiced detachment. They trained themselves to see thoughts with the same neutrality as an outside observer. The key to mental distancing is understanding that thoughts are not instructions, they are merely suggestions. A thought saying, "I can't handle this," does not mean it is true. A thought saying, "This situation is unbearable," is not an objective fact. The problem is, most people never question their thoughts. They take them at face value, even when they are irrational. A mind that is left unchecked becomes a source of suffering. But a mind that's observed loses its power to dictate emotions. One of the most effective ways to practice mental distancing is through labeling thoughts. Instead of saying, "I am stressed," reframe it to, "My mind is generating stressful thoughts." Instead of saying, "I am a failure," shift to, "My brain is experiencing a self-critical thought." This small shift creates distance. It removes personal identity from the thought and allows it to be seen objectively. The moment a thought is labeled, it begins to lose its grip. It is no longer something that defines reality, but something that is simply passing through the mind. Another way to create mental distance is by viewing thoughts as external events rather than internal truths. A person does not control when a bird flies past them or when a cloud moves across the sky. Similarly, thoughts arise and pass without conscious effort. They appear stay for a moment, and then fade, unless they are held onto. The mind is constantly producing thoughts, but only the ones that are engaged with persist. Observing thoughts, rather than fighting them, allows them to move naturally rather than turning into mental battles. Stoic detachment teaches that emotions are not enemies. They are indicators. They provide information, but they do not have to dictate actions. Feeling anger does not mean acting on anger. Feeling fear does not mean retreating. The ability to observe emotions rather than react to them is one of the highest forms of mental strength. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions, but rather recognizing them for what they are, temporary experiences, not defining truths. Perspective is another crucial aspect of mental distancing. Many problems feel overwhelming simply because they are viewed from too narrow a lens. A difficulty that seems unbearable today may be insignificant in a year. A setback that feels devastating in the moment may later be seen as necessary for growth. The Stoics practiced shifting perspective as a way to detach from immediate reactions. They would ask themselves, will this matter in a week? In a month? In a year? By zooming out, the emotional weight of a problem often shrinks. Another technique used by the Stoics is third-person thinking. Instead of engaging with thoughts from a first-person perspective, shift to viewing them as an observer. Instead of saying, I am struggling, reframe it to, he, she is struggling. This creates immediate distance. It allows emotions to be examined without full immersion. Studies have shown that people who engage in third-person self-talk are better at regulating emotions, making decisions under stress, and maintaining composure in difficult situations. By treating thoughts as external rather than personal, they lose their power to overwhelm. Mental distancing is not about eliminating thoughts, but about reducing their control. A person who is too close to their emotions is constantly pulled in different directions. They react impulsively, get lost in mental loops, and struggle to see situations clearly. But a person who creates space between themselves and their thoughts gains clarity. They do not suppress emotions, nor do they let emotions dictate their actions. They become deliberate rather than reactive. A common misconception is that detachment means indifference. But true mental distancing does not lead to apathy. It leads to mastery. It allows for clearer thinking, better decision-making, and a stronger ability to handle adversity. When emotions do not dictate actions, choices become more intentional. When thoughts are not mistaken for reality, perspective remains intact. The Stoics did not eliminate emotions. They trained themselves to see emotions without being controlled by them. One of the biggest challenges in mental distancing is overcoming the mind's natural tendency to fixate. The brain is wired to hold on to negative experiences more than positive ones. This is why a single criticism can overshadow 100 compliments, why one failure feels more significant than multiple successes. But just because the brain fixates does not mean it must be followed. Awareness of this tendency allows for interruption. Instead of allowing one negative thought to spiral, it can be acknowledged and released. The thought itself is not the problem, the attachment to it is. Practicing mental distancing is like training a muscle. At first, thoughts will still feel personal, emotions will still feel overpowering, but over time, the ability to observe rather than react becomes stronger. A mind that was once easily shaken becomes stable. Frustration, doubt, and fear still arise, but they no longer dictate behavior. Detachment does not mean feeling less. It means responding with greater wisdom. Another key practice in mental distancing is recognizing the impermanence of emotions. No feeling lasts forever. Every emotion, no matter how intense, fades with time. Pain weakens, fear dissolves, anger subsides. The problem is not the presence of emotions, but the illusion that they are permanent. The Stoics understood that just as physical sensations pass, so do mental states. The ability to recognize the temporary nature of emotions prevents them from becoming overwhelming. The world around a person may be chaotic, but a mind that is disciplined in detachment remains steady. External events no longer dictate internal states. Challenges are approached with clarity rather than panic. Problems are solved with reason rather than reaction. Mental distancing creates a mind that cannot be easily disturbed. It allows for emotional control without suppression, strength without rigidity, and calmness without indifference. A person who masters mental distancing does not live at the mercy of their thoughts. They do not fear their emotions. They do not allow their minds to be hijacked by temporary discomforts. They move through life with an unshakable core, able to face difficulty without being consumed by it. While most people are controlled by their thoughts, those who practice detachment learn how to control their minds. The ability to see thoughts objectively is not just about reducing stress. It is about reclaiming power. A mind that is not ruled by impulse, fear, or negativity becomes a tool for strength rather than a source of suffering. When thoughts are seen for what they truly are, temporary, fleeting, and often irrational, they lose their ability to control emotions. Mental distancing is not about avoiding reality. It is about seeing reality with clarity. Those who develop this skill become unstoppable because they no longer mistake passing thoughts for unchangeable truths. They think clearly, act deliberately, and move through life with a mind that belongs to them rather than one that controls them. Recognizing thoughts as separate from reality is a powerful breakthrough, but awareness alone is not enough. Distance creates clarity, but direction determines progress. A mind that observes without acting remains stuck, while a mind that learns to harness its inner voice turns thought into fuel. Most people allow their internal dialogue to drain them, to erode confidence, to fill every moment of uncertainty with hesitation. But there is another way. The same voice that creates doubt can be trained to build resilience. The same thoughts that once paralyzed can become the force that moves everything forward. The inner voice is a tool. It can be sharpened, refined, and directed with purpose. The problem is that most people have never taken control of it. They have allowed years of unchecked self-talk to dictate their emotions, their actions, and their limits. They repeat patterns that were never chosen, narratives that were inherited, beliefs that were shaped by fear rather than truth. The way they speak to themselves is often the way they were spoken to as children, the way they were treated in moments of failure, the way they learned to respond to rejection and disappointment. But none of this is permanent. What was programmed can be reprogrammed. Harnessing the inner voice for motivation requires breaking old mental habits. The first step is shifting from passive listening to active engagement. Most people let their thoughts run without question, absorbing negativity as if it is fact. A mind that is allowed to wander without direction will always drift toward the easiest path, and the easiest path is almost always doubt, fear, and hesitation. The brain is wired to detect threats, to anticipate failure, to avoid risk. Left unchecked, it will always choose comfort over challenge. But comfort does not build resilience. It does not create strength. It does not forge the kind of mindset that can withstand pressure. The shift begins with questioning. Every time a thought appears that weakens motivation, it must be challenged. If the mind says, "I can't do this," it must be asked, "Why not?" If it says, "I'm not good enough," the response must be, "What proof do I have that this is true?" If the default reaction to difficulty is avoidance, it must be met with, "What happens if I push through instead?" The mind is not an authority, it is a collection of habits. Those habits can be changed. The more thoughts are questioned, the weaker their grip becomes. Training the inner voice for motivation also requires reframing failure. The mind that views failure as an end will always hesitate. The mind that sees failure as a step forward will always move. This is the difference between those who give up and those who persist. The strongest minds do not see setbacks as reasons to stop. They see them as training. Every difficulty is feedback. Every struggle is an opportunity to develop greater resilience. When the inner voice reinforces this perspective, motivation becomes automatic. The question is no longer, "Will I succeed?" but rather, "How will I grow from this?" Language plays a critical role in this transformation. Words shape perception, and perception dictates action. The way the mind speaks to itself determines the emotional response that follows. If self-talk is filled with hesitation, action will always be delayed. If it is filled with confidence, action will come naturally. The shift from passive to active language is essential. Instead of, "I hope I can do this," it must become, "I will do this." Instead of "I'll try," it must be, "I am committed." Instead of "I wish I was stronger," it must be, "I am becoming stronger." These shifts may seem small, but over time they reshape the way the mind approaches challenge. Momentum is another key factor. Motivation is not created by waiting for the right moment. It is built through movement. The mind that constantly hesitates reinforces doubt. The mind that takes immediate action reinforces confidence. Even the smallest step forward creates a psychological shift. It tells the brain, "I am capable." Every time a challenge is met rather than avoided, the inner voice strengthens. Every time effort is made, despite resistance, belief in one's own ability grows. A mind that is conditioned to take action does not need motivation. It becomes motivation. The Stoics understood that motivation is not about emotion. It is about discipline. Emotions fluctuate, but trained habits remain. If action is dependent on how one feels in the moment, it will always be inconsistent. If action is built into the structure of daily life, it will happen regardless of mood. The strongest minds do not rely on inspiration. They build systems that ensure progress continues even when motivation fades. They do not wait to feel ready. They act, and readiness follows. Another powerful tool for shaping the inner voice is visualization. The mind responds to mental images as if they are reality. If it is constantly shown failure, it will expect failure. If it is constantly shown resilience, it will move toward resilience. High performers in every field use visualization not as wishful thinking, but as mental training. They do not just see success, they see themselves overcoming obstacles. They rehearse the process of persistence. They prepare their minds to respond with strength in difficult moments. The inner voice is deeply influenced by what it is shown. The more it sees a version of the self that acts with confidence, the more it will reinforce that identity. The environment also plays a role in shaping internal dialogue. If surrounded by negativity, criticism, and doubt, the inner voice will absorb those patterns. If surrounded by challenge, encouragement, and resilience, it will adapt to that instead. The mind is shaped by what it repeatedly hears. This is why it is crucial to be intentional about input. The voices that influence daily thought patterns will become the voices that shape self-perception. A major shift in harnessing motivation comes from learning to view effort as an investment rather than a burden. The mind that sees hard work as suffering will always resist. The mind that sees hard work as growth will embrace it. Struggle is unavoidable, but suffering is a choice. When the inner voice reframes effort as a privilege rather than a punishment, motivation follows naturally. The question is no longer, do I have to do this? But rather, how much stronger will I become by doing this? Mastering the inner voice also means understanding that motivation is not about intensity, it is about consistency. A single burst of enthusiasm does not create lasting results. Small, daily actions do. The mind that is trained to take consistent action does not need constant external motivation. It becomes self-sustaining. This is why routines are powerful. They remove the need for decision-making and turn action into habit. When the inner voice is aligned with a structured system, momentum is never lost. The final layer of strengthening motivation is learning to detach from outcomes. When effort is only seen as valuable if it leads to a perfect result, motivation will always be fragile. If results are the only measure of success, every setback will feel like a failure. But when the focus shifts to the process rather than the outcome, motivation remains stable. The Stoics did not measure success by external achievements. They measured it by internal growth. They did not ask, "Did I win?" but rather, "Did I do everything within my control to improve?" When the inner voice aligns with this perspective, motivation is no longer dependent on temporary results. It becomes rooted in something unshakable. Reshaping the inner voice from self-doubt to motivation is not about pretending challenges do not exist. It is about training the mind to respond with resilience rather than hesitation. It is about replacing avoidance with action, fear with confidence, and doubt with discipline. The strongest people are not those who never feel uncertainty. They are those who have trained their inner voice to push through it. They have built a mental foundation that does not collapse under pressure, but strengthens because of it. Once the inner voice becomes a source of motivation rather than doubt, everything changes. Difficulties no longer feel like barriers. They feel like steps forward. Challenges no longer feel like threats. They feel like training. Every thought becomes an opportunity to reinforce strength rather than weakness. The mind, once an obstacle, becomes the greatest asset. And the person who masters this transformation no longer waits for motivation. They create it. Building an inner voice that fuels resilience rather than self-doubt is a critical step in mastering the mind. But the challenge does not end there. Thoughts are not the only forces that influence emotions. The way emotions are handled, processed, and expressed determines whether they become fuel for strength or sources of weakness. The mind is shaped not only by what it thinks, but also by how it reacts. Some people believe that venting frustration, anger, or sadness is a healthy release, a way to clear the mind and regain control. But the truth is, venting often does more harm than good. It reinforces the very emotions people seek to escape, making them feel stronger rather than weaker. The idea that releasing emotions through venting is beneficial is one of the biggest misconceptions in modern psychology. People assume that letting emotions out, whether through ranting to a friend, shouting in frustration, or repeatedly dwelling on problems, will help them move forward. But what actually happens is the opposite. The more an emotion is expressed outwardly, the more it is validated internally. Instead of releasing frustration, venting often amplifies it. Instead of calming the mind, it strengthens the emotional reaction. The more a person rants about an issue, the deeper they embed it into their reality. Neuroscience supports this. When emotions are expressed intensely, they trigger stronger neural connections in the brain, reinforcing patterns of thought and reaction. If anger is expressed frequently through venting, the brain strengthens the pathway for anger. If frustration is verbalized repeatedly, the mind becomes more conditioned to respond with frustration. Emotions are not expelled through venting, they are rehearsed. And what is rehearsed becomes habit. Over time, venting does not reduce emotional responses. It increases their intensity and frequency. The Stoics understood this long before science confirmed it. They knew that emotions, left unchecked, would grow beyond reason. They did not advocate for suppression, but they rejected indulgence. The goal was never to ignore emotions, but to regulate them. Instead of venting, the Stoics practiced containment, redirection, and reflection. They did not see emotions as something to be thrown outward, but as something to be understood and reshaped. This is the key difference between those who are ruled by emotions and those who rule over them. Containment does not mean suppressing emotions or pretending they do not exist. It means recognizing that raw emotional expression is often unhelpful. Instead of reacting immediately, containment allows for space between stimulus and response. This space is where clarity is created. When an emotion arises, the first instinct is often to externalize it, to speak, to act, to vent. But pausing before reacting shifts control from emotion to reason. The strongest minds do not react impulsively. They wait, they assess, and they choose how to respond, rather than letting emotion dictate their actions. One of the most effective ways to process emotions without venting is through redirection. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It is transferred. The same applies to emotional energy. Anger, frustration, or sadness cannot simply disappear, but they can be transformed. The Stoics understood that directing emotions into productive actions was far more effective than expressing them aimlessly. A mind that is trained in redirection does not waste emotional energy in complaints or outbursts. It channels that energy into movement, discipline, and progress. Redirection can take many forms. For some, physical activity absorbs and diffuses emotional energy. The body and mind are deeply connected, and movement has the power to interrupt emotional spirals. This is why physical exertion is often one of the most effective tools for regulating emotions. For others, redirection may involve creative outlets, writing, music, or problem-solving. The goal is not to suppress emotions, but to use them constructively rather than destructively. Another powerful alternative to venting is reflection. The Stoics practiced self-examination daily, not to dwell on emotions, but to understand them. Journaling, structured thinking, and asking the right questions help process emotions in a way that leads to clarity rather than emotional escalation. Instead of venting frustration, writing about it forces the mind to organize thoughts logically. Instead of repeatedly expressing anger, reflecting on its source allows for understanding and resolution. Emotion, when examined with reason, loses its power to control. Perspective shifts also play a crucial role in emotional regulation. Most emotional reactions are exaggerated by the way a situation is perceived. When something feels overwhelming, it is often because it is being viewed through a narrow lens. The Stoics practiced seeing the bigger picture, stepping outside of immediate reactions to evaluate whether emotions were truly justified. They asked themselves whether a situation would matter in the long run, whether it was within their control, and whether reacting emotionally would change anything. These questions created detachment, allowing emotions to be seen objectively rather than felt irrationally. One of the reasons venting feels necessary is the belief that emotions must be expressed fully to be processed. But this is not true. Emotion does not need to be indulged to be understood. It needs to be observed. A mind that constantly expresses every feeling loses control over itself. A mind that learns to observe and process emotions without attachment gains mastery. There is power in restraint, not in suppression, but in controlled release. Restraint does not mean ignoring emotions. It means directing them wisely. The way emotions are framed also affects their intensity. Language shapes thought, and thought shapes emotional response. Saying, "I am furious," reinforces the identity of anger. Saying, "I feel anger," creates space between the self and the emotion. Instead of identifying with the feeling, it becomes something separate, something that can be observed and managed. The Stoics understood this linguistic power and used it to their advantage. They did not say, "I am suffering." They said, "There is discomfort." They did not say, "I am broken." They said, "This is a moment of challenge." This shift in wording changed the emotional weight of situations. It turned overwhelming feelings into temporary experiences. A crucial element of emotional regulation is recognizing the impermanence of feelings. No emotion lasts forever. Anger fades, sadness softens, frustration dissolves. The problem is that most people act on emotions as if they are permanent, making decisions that have lasting consequences based on temporary feelings. The Stoics practiced patience, knowing that emotions are fleeting. They did not make choices in moments of emotional intensity. They waited. They allowed feelings to pass before deciding how to act. This simple practice prevented regret, reduced impulsivity, and created stability. Another factor that strengthens emotional control is detaching from external validation. Many emotional reactions are intensified by how others perceive them. Venting often serves as a way to gain validation rather than to truly process feelings. Complaining about struggles, exaggerating hardships, or seeking sympathy reinforces emotional dependence on others. But true strength comes from internal validation, from the ability to process emotions independently rather than seeking external reinforcement. The Stoics did not need the world to agree with their feelings. They evaluated emotions based on reason, not on social response. Emotional regulation also requires learning when to engage and when to disengage. Not every problem needs a reaction. Not every challenge requires emotional investment. The Stoics understood that energy is limited, and wasting it on minor frustrations weakens the mind. They chose their battles carefully, focusing on what truly mattered and letting go of what did not. A mind that does not waste energy on every inconvenience is a mind that remains sharp, steady, and prepared for real challenges. The strongest people are not those who never feel emotion. They are those who have trained themselves to respond with wisdom rather than impulse. They do not let emotions dictate their actions. They do not waste time venting frustration in ways that reinforce negativity. They use emotions as tools rather than as barriers. They redirect energy rather than allowing it to consume them. They understand that venting does not create relief. It creates dependency on external expression rather than internal mastery. Mastering emotional control is not about denying feelings, but about refusing to be ruled by them. It is about choosing which emotions deserve attention and which are simply distractions. It is about learning to hold back when necessary, to channel energy productively, and to process emotions without being consumed by them. The person who masters this skill gains something rare: a mind that cannot be shaken, a presence that remains composed under pressure, and a resilience that no external force can break. Those who train themselves in emotional regulation do not need venting as an escape. They do not depend on emotional release to find balance. They build balance from within. They develop the ability to process emotions in ways that strengthen them rather than weaken them. They move through life with clarity, composure, and control, unaffected by the emotional storms that shake others. This is not suppression. This is mastery. And the person who achieves it stands apart from the rest, not because they feel less, but because they control more. Mastering emotional regulation removes the need for venting, but true control over emotions requires something even deeper: the ability to shift perspective at will. Every reaction, every moment of distress, every feeling of overwhelm comes from one thing: perspective. The way an event is framed determines whether it is seen as a disaster or a challenge, a failure or a lesson, an obstacle or an opportunity. But most people remain trapped in a single perspective. They see their problems only from the narrow lens of the present moment, consumed by immediate emotions. They forget that perspective is fluid, that time itself provides clarity, and that shifting between past, present, and future thinking is one of the most powerful ways to regulate emotions and strengthen the mind. People who are emotionally reactive see life only through the present. They feel frustration and assume it will last forever. They face a setback and believe it defines them. They encounter difficulty and only see what is directly in front of them, blind to what came before and what will come after. This is why emotions feel overwhelming, because they are viewed as permanent rather than temporary. But those who learn to mentally step out of the present and shift their perspective between past experiences, present awareness, and future possibilities gain control over their thoughts, emotions, and actions. They do not get stuck in momentary hardships because they understand that nothing is fixed. The ability to mentally time travel is one of the most overlooked tools for emotional control. It allows problems to be seen with clarity rather than panic. It prevents emotional overreaction by placing events in their proper context. It creates detachment from immediate discomfort and reinforces long-term thinking. The Stoics practiced this constantly, training their minds to step outside of short-term emotions and evaluate problems from a broader perspective. They knew that what feels unbearable in the moment often becomes insignificant with time. Shifting to past thinking provides a reminder of resilience. Every difficulty that has been overcome proves that challenges are temporary. Reflecting on past hardships that once felt impossible but were eventually resolved creates a powerful mental shift. Instead of feeling consumed by current problems, the mind remembers that it has survived worse. Every moment of past struggle that was endured is proof that the present moment can also be handled. The more the mind recalls past victories over adversity, the more confident it becomes in handling the present. Looking to the past also reveals patterns. Many current struggles are not new, but repeats of previous experiences. The mind tends to react to challenges in familiar ways, repeating the same emotional responses. Recognizing these patterns helps break them. If the same frustration arises in similar situations, it is a sign that the approach needs to change. If the same fears surface repeatedly, they need to be addressed rather than obeyed. The past holds lessons, and those who ignore them are doomed to repeat unnecessary suffering. While the past offers lessons and reassurance, shifting to future thinking provides motivation and clarity. Many problems feel significant only because they are viewed in isolation, but placing them in the context of long-term goals changes their weight. Asking whether today's difficulty will matter in 5 years reduces emotional intensity. A rejection, a failure, a setback, none of these define the future unless they are allowed to. Seeing beyond the present prevents the mind from exaggerating short-term struggles. Future thinking also creates perspective on effort. When difficulty is framed only in terms of the present, it feels like suffering. But when framed in terms of the future, it becomes investment. Struggles in the moment are often necessary steps towards something greater. Every setback, every challenge, every uncomfortable situation builds resilience, experience, and strength. Seeing problems through the lens of future growth shifts emotions from frustration to acceptance. The question is no longer, "Why is this happening to me?" but rather, "How will this prepare me for what's next?" Mental time travel also prevents impulsive decisions. When emotions are high, the temptation to react immediately is strong, but shifting to a future perspective forces the mind to consider long-term consequences. The Stoics practice this by constantly asking how they would feel about their actions in the future. Would giving in to frustration serve them in the long run? Would reacting emotionally create regret? Would avoiding a challenge lead to growth or stagnation? These questions created space between emotion and action, preventing decisions based on temporary feelings. One of the greatest benefits of shifting perspective between timeframes is the ability to detach from problems. Seeing the bigger picture weakens the grip of immediate emotions. When the mind becomes stuck in a loop of stress, stepping back into past or future thinking breaks the cycle. It forces the brain to consider different angles, disrupting repetitive patterns of worry or frustration. Instead of being consumed by the moment, the mind regains control over how the situation is interpreted. This ability also builds patience. When challenges are viewed only from the perspective of the present, they feel endless. But remembering the impermanence of all things changes that perception. Just as past struggles eventually faded, current struggles will too. Just as time softened old pain, it will soften new pain. Nothing remains the same forever, and understanding this makes it easier to endure difficult moments. The Stoics embrace this truth, seeing every challenge as a passing event rather than a permanent condition. Another powerful way to use mental time travel is by envisioning the worst-case scenario. The mind often exaggerates problems, making them feel larger than they are. But when forced to consider the absolute worst possible outcome, clarity returns. In many cases, even the worst-case scenario is not as catastrophic as emotions suggest. The Stoics practiced this by mentally preparing for hardships before they happened, training themselves to remain steady regardless of circumstances. They understood that most fears lose power when confronted directly. Shifting between past, present, and future also enhances decision-making. Many choices feel difficult because they are viewed from a limited perspective. When faced with uncertainty, reflecting on past wisdom, considering future consequences, and grounding oneself in the present moment provides a balanced approach. The mind is less likely to be swayed by emotion and more likely to make decisions based on reason. Those who learn to use this skill navigate challenges with greater confidence and clarity. The ability to mentally shift between timeframes is also a key factor in reducing anxiety. Anxiety thrives in uncertainty, feeding on thoughts about what might go wrong, but placing those fears in the context of past resilience and future possibilities weakens them. The mind can either spiral in doubt or anchor itself in the understanding that no situation is permanent. The more it practices shifting perspectives, the less it is controlled by fear. This practice also prevents regret. Many people live trapped in either the past or the future, unable to find balance. Some dwell on past mistakes, reliving failures and reinforcing guilt. Others obsess over the future, constantly worrying about what might happen. But those who learn to navigate between time frames with purpose gain freedom. They use the past for wisdom, the future for direction, and the present for action. They do not remain stuck in regret, nor do they let fear of the future paralyze them. One of the greatest advantages of this skill is the ability to control emotional reactions to external events. People who lack perspective are easily thrown off course by circumstances. They react impulsively, take problems personally, and allow emotions to dictate their actions. But those who can step outside of the immediate moment see situations with clarity. They do not waste energy on unnecessary reactions. They choose their responses based on long-term impact rather than short-term feelings. The mind that masters this ability gains a sense of control over life itself. Challenges no longer feel overwhelming because they are seen within the larger context of time. Emotions no longer dictate actions because they are placed within a broader perspective. The present moment no longer feels like the only reality because the past and future are equally accessible for guidance and reassurance. Those who train themselves in mental time travel become unshakable. They do not make decisions based on fleeting emotions. They do not remain stuck in their current struggles. They do not allow the weight of the present to cloud their judgment. They have mastered the ability to step back, see beyond the immediate situation, and navigate life with wisdom rather than reaction. A mind that can shift perspectives at will is a mind that cannot be controlled by circumstance. It remains steady in hardship, patient in uncertainty, and disciplined in decision-making. It is not ruled by temporary emotions, but guided by long-term vision. This is the kind of mind that moves through life with clarity, confidence, and strength. It is the kind of mind that cannot be broken. Mastering the ability to shift perspective between past, present, and future brings clarity. But clarity alone is not enough if the mind remains trapped in a cycle of overthinking. The greatest source of unnecessary suffering is not external events, but the endless repetition of thoughts that serve no purpose. The same problem is replayed in the mind over and over, with no resolution, only deeper frustration. The mind, instead of being a tool for strength, becomes a prison. Overthinking exhausts energy, fuels doubt, and creates problems that do not exist anywhere except in thought. The stronger the grip of rumination, the weaker the ability to act with clarity. This is why those who do not learn to silence overthinking remain stuck, trapped in their own mental noise, unable to move forward. Most people believe that thinking through a problem enough times will eventually bring a solution, but this is an illusion. Overthinking is not problem-solving, it is mental stagnation. It does not create clarity, it creates confusion. It does not strengthen decision-making, it paralyzes it. The same thought is turned over endlessly, but nothing changes. Instead of leading to action, overthinking leads to hesitation. Instead of bringing understanding, it deepens self-doubt. A mind that does not know how to stop overanalyzing is a mind that wastes its own potential. The Stoics understood that overthinking was one of the greatest threats to peace of mind. They trained themselves to control thought rather than being controlled by it. They knew that thinking is only useful when it leads to clarity, action, or acceptance. Anything beyond that is wasted energy. The more a thought is repeated without resolution, the more power it gains. This is why intrusive thoughts feel overwhelming, because they are given attention they do not deserve. The key to breaking free from overthinking is learning to recognize which thoughts are useful and which are merely noise. The first step in silencing overthinking is identifying when it is happening. Most people do not realize when they are trapped in mental loops. They believe they are simply being thorough, that they are preparing, analyzing, or gaining insight. But the test is simple. If a thought has been repeated more than twice without leading to action or acceptance, it is no longer productive. If it has created more stress than clarity, it is not serving a purpose. The moment a thought becomes a cycle rather than a step forward, it must be disrupted. Breaking the cycle of overthinking begins with interrupting the pattern. The brain operates in loops. Thoughts reinforce emotions, and emotions reinforce thoughts. This is why a single moment of doubt can turn into hours of mental exhaustion. The longer a thought is entertained, the more difficult it becomes to escape. The Stoics used immediate disruption to break these cycles. They would force themselves to shift focus, to engage in physical movement, or to introduce new mental input. The goal was simple: do not allow the same thought to repeat unchecked. One of the most effective ways to disrupt overthinking is through decisive action. The mind overthinks when it hesitates. When a choice is postponed, the brain fills the gap with endless analysis. The solution is to train the mind to act before hesitation sets in. Small, immediate decisions weaken the grip of indecision. The faster an action is taken, the less opportunity the mind has to spiral into unnecessary thought. A person who consistently chooses action over hesitation does not become trapped in rumination. They develop a habit of movement rather than paralysis. Another powerful technique for stopping overthinking is externalization. Thoughts gain power when they remain internal. When left in the mind, they multiply without structure, becoming overwhelming. But when a thought is written down, spoken aloud, or reframed in a structured way, it loses intensity. The Stoics practiced journaling not to dwell on thoughts, but to free themselves from them. A problem that seems impossible in the mind often becomes clear when it is put into words. Externalizing thoughts forces the brain to organize them rather than repeat them. The mind overthinks when it fears uncertainty. It tries to predict every outcome, control every possibility, and prepare for every scenario. But the more it tries to control, the more anxious it becomes. The Stoics rejected this need for certainty. They embraced the unknown, training themselves to accept that not everything could be planned, predicted, or prevented. They knew that the only true control was over their own response, not external events. A mind that learns to let go of the need for certainty is a mind that no longer fuels overthinking. One of the most effective Stoic practices for silencing overthinking is reframing problems in terms of control. Every situation can be divided into two categories: what is within control and what is not. Overthinking often focuses on the uncontrollable: what others think, what might happen, what has already occurred. But none of these can be changed through thought alone. The moment the mind shifts focus from external worries to internal control, overthinking loses its power. The question is no longer, what if, but what can I do now? Another way to escape overthinking is to introduce constraint. The mind overthinks when it believes it has unlimited time to analyze. The more time given to a problem, the longer it will consume mental space. The Stoics understood that clear thinking required structure. They would limit the amount of time given to certain thoughts, setting a boundary for when reflection must end and action must begin. A decision made within a time constraint is often just as effective as one made after hours of unnecessary analysis. Physical movement is also a powerful way to disrupt overthinking. The mind and body are deeply connected, and physical activity shifts focus away from mental loops. The Stoics valued movement as a way to clear the mind, whether through walking, training, or engaging in simple physical tasks. The brain finds it difficult to remain stuck in repetitive thought when the body is actively engaged. This is why many people find clarity during exercise or movement. The mind is forced to break out of its cycle and return to the present. Another critical shift in stopping overthinking is learning to tolerate discomfort. Many people overthink because they try to escape negative emotions. They analyze situations repeatedly in an attempt to avoid pain, disappointment, or failure. But the Stoics accepted discomfort as part of life. They did not waste energy trying to avoid every difficulty. They faced it directly, allowing themselves to feel discomfort without letting it consume them. A mind that stops resisting discomfort stops overthinking. The way thoughts are framed also determines their power. Overthinking thrives on exaggeration. A small problem is made to feel massive. A temporary setback is treated as permanent. The Stoics countered this by using logic to shrink problems down to their actual size. They would ask themselves whether a thought was an exaggeration, whether it truly mattered, and whether it would still seem important in the future. This simple shift in perspective prevented small worries from growing into mental burdens. Training the mind to be decisive also weakens overthinking. Many people become stuck in mental loops because they fear making the wrong choice. They hesitate, analyze, and second-guess every option. But the truth is, most decisions are not final. The Stoics understood that the only real failure is inaction. They did not fear making choices because they knew that mistakes could be adjusted, paths could be changed, and lessons could be learned. A mind that does not fear decision-making does not become trapped in over-analysis. Mastering overthinking is not about eliminating thought. It is about directing it. The goal is not to suppress thoughts, but to train the mind to recognize which ones are worth attention and which ones must be let go. The Stoics did not avoid thinking, but they controlled it. They treated thoughts as tools rather than obstacles. They knew that a thought that does not lead to action, understanding, or peace is a thought that must be released. A person who silences overthinking gains a level of mental freedom that few ever experience. They are no longer weighed down by their own mind. They do not spend hours trapped in self-doubt, hesitation, or unnecessary analysis. They move forward with clarity, act with confidence, and remain composed even in uncertainty. Their mind is no longer a battlefield. It is a source of strength. Breaking free from overthinking is one of the greatest skills a person can develop. It allows energy to be spent on what truly matters rather than wasted on endless mental loops. It creates a mind that is clear, focused, and capable of handling challenges without unnecessary stress. Those who master this skill do not just think less, they think better. They do not just escape mental noise, they create mental discipline, and with that discipline, they move through life with a clarity and confidence that nothing can shake. Breaking free from overthinking creates space for clarity, but if that space is not intentionally filled with structure, the mind will default back to chaos. A mind that is not organized will always be at war with itself. Thoughts will pile up, emotions will become entangled, and decisions will feel heavier than they need to be. The Stoics understood that mental clarity is not something that happens naturally. It must be cultivated. One of their most powerful tools for doing this was journaling. Journaling is not just writing down thoughts. It is the process of organizing the mind. It is taking what is scattered and giving it form, removing what is unnecessary and refining what is useful. A mind that is left to wander will always create confusion. It will amplify small problems, distort emotions, and replay unnecessary fears. But a mind that is disciplined through structured writing becomes clear, resilient, and strong. The difference between those who feel overwhelmed and those who remain composed is often the ability to articulate thoughts with precision. The act of writing forces the mind to slow down. Most thinking happens too quickly. Emotions rise before they are fully understood. Reactions form before they are examined. But when thoughts are written, they must be processed at the speed of language. This creates reflection rather than reaction. It prevents impulsive decisions by allowing emotions to be examined logically. Instead of being consumed by a feeling, writing allows for a separation between the emotion and the person experiencing it. This small gap is where clarity is found. One of the greatest benefits of journaling is that it exposes patterns. Many problems feel new when they arise, but in reality, they are often repetitions of the same internal conflicts. The same fears return in different forms. The same doubts appear with slightly different details. Writing reveals this. It forces awareness of how often certain thoughts repeat, how often emotions follow the same triggers, and how much of mental suffering is self-created. Once these patterns are recognized, they can be changed. A person who does not track their thoughts will remain stuck in the same cycles indefinitely. But a person who documents their thoughts can break free from unconscious habits. Journaling also helps separate fact from interpretation. The mind naturally distorts reality, adding layers of emotion to neutral events. A single setback turns into a narrative of failure. A single mistake becomes proof of incompetence. Writing removes this distortion. When an event is written without exaggeration, its true weight is revealed. The mind may insist that a situation is catastrophic, but when put into words, it often becomes clear that it is not. The act of writing forces objectivity. It prevents emotions from magnifying reality. The Stoics used journaling not just for clarity, but for strengthening their values. They documented what they wanted to live by, what principles they refused to compromise, and what lessons they needed to remember. A person who writes down their values reinforces them daily. They are less likely to be swayed by external pressures, less likely to forget what truly matters. Writing solidifies identity. It acts as a compass when emotions try to pull in different directions. Without this reinforcement, it is easy to drift, to compromise under pressure, to react in ways that do not align with one's beliefs. But with consistent reflection, the mind becomes anchored in its principles. Writing also allows for mental detoxification. Thoughts that are not processed become internal clutter. They take up space, creating stress and tension. But thoughts that are written down no longer need to be held onto. They are released. This is why people who journal regularly experience less anxiety and overthinking. Their minds are not carrying excess weight. They are not burdened by thoughts that have no resolution. The simple act of putting thoughts on paper creates a sense of relief, even when nothing external has changed. Journaling also enhances decision-making. Most difficult choices feel overwhelming because they are processed only in the mind. But when options are written out, they become clearer. The benefits and consequences of each choice can be examined logically rather than emotionally. Writing removes impulsivity from decision-making. It forces rational analysis. The Stoics practice this deliberately, asking themselves whether their choices aligned with their values, whether they were based on reason or emotion, and whether they were within their control. This process eliminated unnecessary stress, allowing them to act with conviction rather than doubt. Another benefit of structured writing is its ability to reframe experiences. The way an event is written determines how it is remembered. If something is documented as a failure, it will be stored in the mind as failure. If it is written as a lesson, it will be stored as growth. The Stoics used journaling as a way to control memory. They knew that suffering is often created in hindsight when experiences are remembered in negative ways. By deliberately reframing events in writing, they ensured that their past was a source of strength rather than regret. One of the most powerful journaling techniques is the practice of self-questioning. Instead of simply documenting thoughts, the Stoics asked themselves direct questions. Is this problem as big as it feels right now? Am I responding with reason or with emotion? What part of this is within my control? What lesson can I take from this experience? Questions force the mind to move beyond surface-level reactions. They prevent the kind of passive journaling that reinforces negativity. They create shifts in thinking that lead to real change. Another valuable aspect of journaling is its ability to track progress. Many people underestimate how much they have grown because they do not document it. They assume they are the same person they were a year ago because they have no record of their changes. But writing allows growth to be seen. It provides proof of resilience, evidence of improvement, and a reminder that struggles do not last forever. When an old journal entry is read, it often becomes clear that what once seemed unbearable has now been overcome. This builds confidence. It strengthens the belief that future challenges will also be handled. Journaling also removes emotional pressure from relationships. Many people rely on venting to others as their primary form of emotional processing, but this creates dependence on external validation. Writing allows emotions to be processed independently. Instead of needing someone else to listen, thoughts can be worked through alone. This creates emotional self-sufficiency. It prevents unnecessary conflicts caused by venting emotions impulsively. A person who journals does not need constant reassurance from others because they have trained themselves to handle emotions internally. Another powerful use of journaling is the practice of gratitude writing. The mind naturally focuses on problems more than positives. This is a survival mechanism. It is wired to detect threats. But this tendency creates unnecessary stress. Gratitude writing forces the brain to shift focus. When positives are documented regularly, the mind starts noticing them more often. This does not mean ignoring problems, but it prevents them from overshadowing everything else. The Stoics did not ignore difficulties, but they balanced them by acknowledging what was good. They knew that what the mind repeatedly focuses on becomes reality. Journaling also helps with self-discipline. Writing down goals and tracking progress creates accountability. A goal that is written is more likely to be followed through. A habit that is documented is more likely to be maintained. The Stoics used writing as a way to reinforce discipline, reminding themselves daily of what they were committed to. They did not rely on motivation, they built structure. A person who journals about their habits develops the ability to stay consistent even when motivation fades. Another key benefit of structured writing is the ability to detach from emotions. When feelings remain internal, they feel like absolute truth. But when written, they become something separate. This creates the space needed to examine them without being consumed by them. Writing down anger makes it easier to question. Documenting fear makes it easier to challenge. The Stoics used journaling as a way to prevent emotions from taking over their judgment. They knew that the moment an emotion is written, it loses some of its power. The practice of journaling does not require elaborate writing. It does not need to be poetic or artistic. It only needs to be consistent. The simple act of organizing thoughts creates mental clarity. Writing doesn't have to solve problems. It only needs to bring awareness. The more structured the mind becomes through writing, the stronger it becomes in handling life's challenges. Those who train themselves in this practice gain something invaluable. They develop a mind that is not easily shaken. They do not carry unnecessary mental weight. They do not remain stuck in cycles of thought that go nowhere. They do not allow emotions to dictate their actions. They move through life with greater clarity, stability, and confidence. A person who journals consistently is a person who takes control of their own mind. They do not allow thoughts to remain chaotic. They do not let emotions control their perspective. They build discipline in thinking, strength in resilience, and confidence in decision-making. Their mind is not a battlefield, it is a place of clarity, and that clarity is what separates those who react impulsively from those who move with intention. Organizing thoughts through structured writing brings clarity, but clarity alone does not guarantee emotional stability. The mind is deeply influenced by external factors, and one of the most powerful, yet often overlooked tools for emotional regulation is sound. While the Stoics emphasized internal control, they also understood that the environment plays a role in shaping mental states. Among the many external influences on the mind, music stands as one of the most potent. It has the ability to shift mood, enhance focus, and regulate emotions without requiring conscious effort. The difference between a mind that is easily swayed by emotions and a mind that remains steady often comes down to the ability to manage sensory input. Music is not just entertainment, it is a form of psychological conditioning. The brain responds to sound on a primal level, triggering chemical reactions that influence emotion, attention, and even decision-making. This is why certain sounds can create a sense of calm, while others intensify stress. A person who learns to control their auditory environment gains a significant advantage in emotional regulation. Instead of being at the mercy of fluctuating moods, they can use sound as a tool to direct their mental state. One of the most immediate effects of music is its impact on stress levels. The body responds to sound in the same way it responds to other external stimuli. Slow, steady rhythms can lower heart rate and reduce anxiety, while chaotic or dissonant sounds can elevate stress. The Stoics, though they lived in a time before modern neuroscience, intuitively understood the value of harmony in external influences. They sought environments that supported inner stillness rather than agitation. A person who is constantly exposed to jarring noise will find it difficult to maintain composure, while one who deliberately selects calming sounds creates a foundation for emotional steadiness. Beyond stress reduction, music also plays a significant role in focus and cognitive function. The brain operates in different states depending on sensory input. When exposed to steady, structured sound, it enters a mode of concentration that enhances productivity. This is why many people find it easier to work or study with background music that provides a consistent auditory framework. The Stoics valued deep thought and intentional action, both of which require sustained attention. Using music to enhance focus is not about distraction, but about creating an optimal mental environment for disciplined thinking. The connection between music and memory is another factor that can be leveraged for emotional control. The brain links sounds with experiences, creating strong associations that influence mood. A song tied to a positive memory can immediately shift emotional state, just as a sound linked to stress can trigger anxiety. Those who understand this connection can use it to their advantage, selecting music that reinforces desired emotional states rather than allowing uncontrolled associations to dictate mood. The Stoics trained themselves to be aware of external influences, recognizing that what enters the mind shapes its function. Music also has a direct effect on physical energy levels. Rhythmic, high-tempo sounds stimulate the nervous system, increasing alertness and motivation. This is why music is often used during physical training or high-intensity tasks. It acts as a psychological stimulant, pushing the body and mind beyond their usual limits. The Stoics placed great emphasis on endurance and resilience, understanding that physical and mental strength were intertwined. Using music as a tool for energy management allows a person to harness this connection, increasing stamina and reducing mental fatigue. Another powerful use of music is in emotional processing. While venting often reinforces negative emotions, music allows for controlled emotional expression. A person struggling with frustration or sadness can channel those emotions through sound rather than through impulsive reaction. This creates a release that does not depend on external validation or destructive behavior. The Stoics practiced detachment from emotional turmoil, not through suppression, but through intentional redirection. Music provides a structured way to experience and move through emotions without being consumed by them. Sleep quality is another area where music plays a crucial role in mental regulation. The brain requires a transition period to move from wakefulness to rest, and auditory input influences this process. Calm, repetitive sounds signal the nervous system to slow down, making it easier to enter deep sleep. The Stoics emphasized the importance of maintaining physical and mental balance, knowing that rest was essential for clear thinking. Those who struggle with an overactive mind before sleep can use sound as a way to guide the brain into a state of relaxation. Music also influences breathing patterns, which in turn affect emotional stability. Slow, steady rhythms encourage deep breathing, which activates the parasympathetic nervous system and reduces stress. This is why many meditation practices incorporate sound, because the mind follows the rhythm it perceives. The Stoics understood the value of breath control in maintaining composure, and pairing it with the right auditory input strengthens this practice. A mind that is trained to use sound intentionally does not get easily overwhelmed by external pressures. One of the most overlooked aspects of music's influence is its ability to shift perspective. Just as mental time travel allows for emotional detachment, music can act as a bridge between emotional states. A person feeling stuck in a negative mindset can use sound to transition toward a more constructive state of mind. This shift is not forced, but naturally occurs as the brain adapts to the auditory input. The Stoics trained themselves to step outside of immediate emotions to see the bigger picture, and music can be used in a similar way to break free from unproductive thought patterns. The Stoics also valued the concept of premeditatio malorum, mentally preparing for adversity before it occurs. Music can be used as part of this training, conditioning the mind to respond with strength rather than fear. Listening to sounds that evoke feelings of resilience, determination, or composure reinforces these states even before challenges arise. Just as an athlete trains muscles before competition, the mind can be trained through auditory conditioning. A person who consistently exposes themselves to sounds that align with their values strengthens their ability to embody those values in real situations. Music's influence extends to social interaction as well. The energy of a conversation, the tone of an interaction, and the atmosphere of an environment are all shaped by sound. The Stoics were highly aware of how external influences affected internal states, and they sought to minimize unnecessary agitation. Choosing music that fosters calmness before a difficult conversation or that energizes before a demanding task can change the outcome of those experiences. The mind is always responding to sensory input, and those who control that input gain greater control over their responses. One of the most valuable uses of music in mental regulation is in reinforcing identity. People often listen to music that reflects how they currently feel, but a more powerful approach is to listen to music that reflects who they want to become. The Stoics understood that identity is shaped by repeated actions and thoughts. By intentionally selecting music that aligns with desired traits, strength, focus, discipline, the brain begins to associate those qualities with the self. This creates a reinforcement loop where external sound influences internal belief, which in turn influences behavior. Another benefit of using music intentionally is its ability to reduce decision fatigue. The brain is constantly processing information, and unnecessary decisions deplete mental energy. Choosing music in advance to match different tasks, work, rest, training, reflection, removes the need for constant decision-making. The Stoics valued efficiency in thought and action, eliminating distractions that weakened focus. Structuring auditory input in a similar way prevents wasted energy on unimportant choices, preserving mental strength for what truly matters. Using music for mental regulation is not about relying on it as an emotional crutch. It is about understanding its influence and using it strategically. Just as diet affects physical health, sound affects mental health. A person who takes control of their auditory environment is a person who takes control of their mental state. The Stoics sought mastery over external influences, and music is one of the most powerful yet simplest tools for achieving this mastery. A mind that understands the role of sound does not get lost in unregulated emotions. It does not allow external chaos to dictate internal stability. It uses every tool available to maintain clarity, composure, and focus. Those who train themselves in this practice gain a mental advantage over those who let their environment shape their emotions unconsciously. They build a mindset that remains steady in the midst of noise, strong in the presence of distraction, and unshakable in the face of external pressure. Mastering the influence of music is not about escape, it is about control. It is about using external tools to reinforce internal discipline. It is about recognizing that sound is not passive background noise, but an active force that shapes perception, emotion, and action. Those who understand this do not just listen to music, they use it with purpose. and that purpose becomes another layer of mental strength, another step toward a mind that is disciplined, resilient, and completely unshakable. Controlling the mind's response to external influences like music builds emotional regulation, but true mastery over thoughts requires something deeper. When the mind is caught in overwhelming emotions, when stress clouds judgment, or when hesitation takes over, it often feels impossible to step back and regain control. Thoughts become personal, emotions become identity, and self-doubt takes hold. The way the mind speaks to itself in these moments determines whether it will sink deeper into confusion or rise above it with clarity. The Stoics understood that detachment from emotions is essential for maintaining reason, but detachment is not about suppression. It is about shifting perspective. One of the most effective ways to do this is through language itself. Most people talk to themselves in a way they would never speak to others. When mistakes happen, the inner voice turns cruel. When setbacks occur, self-judgment intensifies. The mind says, "I'm a failure, I can't handle this," or "I'll never be good enough." These statements feel absolute, as if they are facts rather than fleeting emotions. But the mind is not an objective observer. It is shaped by the words it repeats. If language can trap a person in self-doubt, it can also be used to break free. The way thoughts are framed determines their impact. One of the most powerful techniques for gaining control over self-talk is using names and the second-person perspective. Instead of speaking to oneself in the first person, "I don't know what to do," "I am not strong enough," shifting to second person or using one's own name creates immediate detachment. Saying, "You are capable of handling this," or "John, you have overcome worse before," changes the way the brain processes the thought. It creates space between the emotion and the person experiencing it. The shift may seem small, but it has a profound effect on emotional regulation. This technique works because it forces the mind to step outside of its immediate reaction. When emotions are high, thoughts become tunnel-visioned. The brain loses its ability to think logically because it's too immersed in the experience. But addressing oneself by name triggers a shift. It is as if an external coach is speaking rather than the emotional mind. The brain responds differently to external guidance than to internal dialogue. It becomes more rational, more objective, and more composed. Studies in psychology confirm this. Research shows that when people refer to themselves in the third person or use their own name in self-talk, they make better decisions, regulate emotions more effectively, and feel less overwhelmed by stress. Athletes, leaders, and high performers use this technique instinctively, speaking to themselves as if they are coaching someone else. It allows them to remain composed under pressure, giving themselves advice with clarity rather than reacting impulsively. This shift in self-talk also changes the emotional weight of situations. Problems that feel personal and overwhelming become challenges to be solved rather than reflections of identity. Instead of saying, "I am failing," saying, "You are facing a difficult situation, but you will get through it," removes the attachment to the struggle. It turns the focus from identity to action. The mind stops seeing problems as permanent and starts viewing them as temporary obstacles. The Stoics practiced this kind of detachment through written reflection. Marcus Aurelius often addressed himself in his writings, reminding himself of his principles and guiding his own thoughts as if he were advising a friend. This practice allowed him to stay grounded even in moments of doubt. He was not consumed by emotion because he created a separation between himself and his thoughts. This technique can be applied in daily life, transforming the way the mind responds to stress, failure, and uncertainty. Another reason this approach is effective is that it interrupts emotional spirals. When negative thoughts build momentum, they tend to reinforce themselves. The mind repeats the same worries, strengthening them with every repetition. But shifting to second person disrupts the cycle. It forces a pause, a moment of reflection. Instead of letting emotions dictate the narrative, the mind takes control of the story. It introduces reasoning where there was only reaction. This method is also powerful in moments of indecision. When uncertainty takes hold, the mind often becomes paralyzed, unable to see the best path forward. But addressing oneself as an external figure makes decision-making clearer. Instead of saying, "I don't know what to do," shifting to, "You have handled difficult choices before. What would you tell someone else in this situation?" changes the approach. It removes the personal fear attached to the decision and replaces it with logical problem-solving. Using names and the second-person perspective also strengthens self-discipline. When emotions push toward distraction or avoidance, this technique acts as a reset, saying, "You know what you need to do. Stop wasting time and take action," creates accountability. The mind listens differently when addressed as an external figure. It responds with greater discipline because it is being given direct guidance rather than vague intention. This method also helps in handling criticism. When feedback is received, the immediate reaction is often defensiveness. The mind interprets criticism as a personal attack rather than an opportunity for growth. But shifting to second-person perspective allows for a more objective response. Instead of reacting emotionally, saying, "John, is there something valuable in this feedback that you can use to improve?" creates distance. It turns the situation into a learning opportunity rather than a threat to self-worth. The practice of coaching oneself in this way also reinforces confidence. Self-doubt thrives in isolation when thoughts are left unchecked. But when the mind actively encourages itself with clear language, self-belief grows. Saying, "You have faced worse and come out stronger," reminds the brain of past resilience. It builds a foundation of inner support that is not dependent on external validation. The Stoics did not wait for others to reassure them. They trained themselves to provide their own reinforcement. This approach also prevents over-identification with emotions. People often say, "I am anxious," or "I am angry," making the emotion part of their identity. But emotions are temporary states, not fixed traits. Shifting to, "You are experiencing anxiety, but it will pass," or "This frustration does not define you," changes the way emotions are processed. It prevents them from becoming permanent and allows them to move through the mind without taking control. Using this technique consistently also reshapes long-term thinking patterns. The brain is adaptable. It reinforces what it repeatedly experiences. If the mind is constantly addressed with encouragement, clarity, and discipline, those qualities become the default. Instead of being reactive, the mind becomes proactive. Instead of spiraling into self-doubt, it learns to correct itself. This is not about artificial positivity, but about training the brain to respond with strength rather than weakness. Another advantage of this method is its ability to manage fear. When the mind is consumed by worry, it exaggerates risk and minimizes capability. But speaking to oneself as a guide changes this perception. Saying, "You have prepared for this, trust yourself," shifts the focus from fear to readiness. It reminds the brain of competence rather than uncertainty. The Stoics believed that fear was not to be eliminated, but to be faced with logic. This technique reinforces that principle by shifting thought from paralysis to action. This approach also enhances resilience. Life is unpredictable, and challenges will always arise. The difference between those who crumble and those who endure is how they frame adversity. A person who constantly tells themselves, "I can't do this," will struggle. But a person who says, "You are stronger than this challenge," builds an unshakable mindset. The words the mind hears most often become the beliefs that drive action. Using names and second-person perspective also helps in staying present. When the mind is caught in past regrets or future anxieties, it loses touch with reality. Speaking to oneself with direct focus brings attention back to the moment. Saying, "Right now you need to focus on what is within your control," stops unnecessary mental wandering. It reinforces presence, which is essential for making clear decisions. Training the mind in this way is a discipline. It is not about forcing positivity, but about developing a structured way of thinking. It is about replacing unproductive self-talk with guidance that leads to action. The Stoics understood that mental strength is built through intentional practice. They did not wait for clarity. They created it through reflection, detachment, and deliberate thought. A person who masters this technique gains a level of mental independence that few achieve. They are not controlled by emotion. They do not drown in self-doubt. They do not wait for external motivation. They guide themselves with clarity, discipline, and composure. Their mind is no longer an enemy. It becomes their greatest ally. And with that, they move through life with the kind of strength that nothing can shake. Coaching yourself with clarity strengthens inner discipline, but no matter how controlled the mind becomes, it is still exposed to external forces. The greatest test of mental resilience is not just managing internal dialogue, but preventing it from being shaped by the negativity of others. The mind does not operate in isolation. It absorbs the energy, emotions, and attitudes of those around it. If left unchecked, external negativity seeps into internal thought, hijacking focus, draining energy, and weakening emotional stability. True strength is not just about regulating personal emotions, but resisting the influence of those who seek to impose their chaos onto others. Most people do not realize how deeply they are affected by the emotional states of others. A single conversation can shift an entire mood. A negative remark can linger in the mind for hours. A tense environment can create stress even when nothing is personally wrong. This is emotional contagion, the unconscious absorption of external emotions. It happens without awareness, shaping behavior, decision-making, and self-perception. The person who does not guard their mind against this influence will find themselves constantly reacting rather than acting with intention. Emotional contagion is strongest in environments where negativity is dominant. When surrounded by stress, pessimism, or fear, the brain mirrors those emotions. It is wired for social connection, designed to pick up on subtle cues and match the emotional state of others. This is why being around anxious people increases anxiety. It is why being in a workplace filled with frustration creates frustration. It is why negative conversations breed more negativity. The brain perceives the emotional environment as a signal of how it should respond. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that external influences were constant, but they refused to let those influences dictate their internal state. They trained themselves to be aware of what entered their minds, recognizing that not every emotion they felt was their own. They questioned every reaction, asking whether it was a genuine response or a reflection of someone else's energy. This level of awareness is the first step in avoiding emotional contagion, realizing that not every feeling that arises belongs to you. A common mistake is believing that resisting negativity means ignoring it, but suppression is not the same as control. When negativity is ignored, it is still processed subconsciously, influencing thought patterns without awareness. True resistance comes from acknowledgement without absorption. Noticing negativity without engaging in it creates mental separation. Instead of reacting, the mind steps back, observes, and remains steady. The moment awareness is introduced, emotional contagion loses its grip. The strongest form of protection against external negativity is a clearly defined internal philosophy. When values and principles are deeply ingrained, external influences have less power. The person who knows exactly who they are and what they stand for does not easily adopt the emotions of others. They filter what they allow into their mind, measuring every influence against their personal standards. The Stoics practice this by reinforcing their guiding principles daily, writing them down, reflecting on them, and internalizing them so deeply that no external force could shake them. Boundaries are another essential defense. Emotional contagion is strongest in relationships where boundaries are weak. When someone else's negativity is allowed unrestricted access to the mind, it takes root and spreads. Setting clear emotional boundaries is not about shutting people out, but about choosing what is engaged with and what is left outside. This means not participating in conversations that fuel negativity, not absorbing the frustrations of others as personal burdens, and not allowing external chaos to disrupt internal stability. One of the most effective ways to avoid emotional contagion is to control focus. What the mind repeatedly engages with becomes its reality. If attention is directed toward negativity, it grows. If attention is redirected toward constructive action, negativity weakens. The Stoics trained themselves to shift focus deliberately, choosing not to dwell on things outside of their control. They understood that energy follows attention. Whatever is given mental space expands, and whatever is ignored fades. Detachment from external negativity also requires self-awareness. Many people unknowingly contribute to their own emotional instability by seeking out negativity. They engage in gossip, participate in complaints, or absorb pessimism from media and social interactions. They believe they are simply staying informed or expressing opinions, but in reality, they are feeding emotional contagion. The Stoics avoided unnecessary exposure to negativity, choosing instead to surround themselves with people, ideas, and practices that reinforced resilience. Protecting against emotional contagion also means recognizing manipulative emotional influence. Some people use negativity as a means of control, projecting their fears and frustrations onto others to maintain dominance. These individuals create environments where anxiety, doubt, and guilt are used to shape behavior. Recognizing when negativity is being used as a tool for influence prevents it from taking effect. The Stoics trained themselves to remain unaffected by praise or criticism, knowing that both could be forms of manipulation. They refused to let their sense of self be dictated by external validation or disapproval. Another key factor in avoiding emotional contagion is limiting reactive responses. The moment negativity is met with reaction, it gains power. When frustration is met with frustration, it spreads. When anger is met with anger, it escalates. But when negativity is met with composure, it loses momentum. The Stoics practiced this by maintaining emotional neutrality in the face of provocation. They did not allow others to dictate their emotional state. They remained unmoved, responding with reason rather than impulse. A strong mental filter is necessary in high-stress environments. Workplaces, social gatherings, and even family interactions can be breeding grounds for emotional contagion. In these situations, the ability to mentally separate from the surrounding energy is crucial. The Stoics practiced viewing situations from a higher perspective, reminding themselves that external chaos did not have to become internal turmoil. They trained themselves to see beyond momentary frustration, maintaining a mindset that was unaffected by the shifting emotions of those around them. Another effective method for maintaining mental stability is engaging in grounding practices. When negativity begins to take hold, redirecting focus to the body and breath disrupts its influence. The Stoics used breath control and simple physical actions to regain composure, preventing external emotions from taking over. A slow breath, a steady posture, a deliberate movement. These small actions anchor the mind in the present and prevent it from being pulled into the emotional currents of others. Social environments shape thought patterns more than most people realize. The mind is constantly adjusting to the dominant energy of the people it interacts with. This is why choosing associations carefully is one of the most powerful ways to guard against emotional contagion. The Stoics were highly selective in their interactions, preferring the company of those who reinforced discipline, wisdom, and composure. They did not waste energy on meaningless conflict or unnecessary drama. They understood that the mind becomes a reflection of the influences it allows. Avoiding emotional contagion is not about avoiding people. It is about mastering the ability to remain unaffected by their emotional instability. This requires training, just like any other mental skill. It requires conscious effort to recognize when emotions are being influenced externally and to take control before they take root. The mind that is unguarded will be shaped by its surroundings, but the mind that is disciplined will shape its own reality. Resisting external negativity does not mean rejecting all emotions. It means choosing which emotions are allowed to remain. It means deciding which influences deserve attention and which must be ignored. It means controlling mental space with the same discipline as physical space. The Stoics understood that the environment may be chaotic, but the mind does not have to be. A person who masters this skill gains an unshakable inner world. They do not absorb the stress of others. They do not let negativity dictate their thoughts. They do not allow external pessimism to weaken their resolve. They walk through life steady, composed and untouched by the emotional storms of those around them. This level of control is not common. Most people are easily swayed, easily triggered, easily pulled into the emotions of those around them. But those who train themselves to resist emotional contagion rise above. They develop a mind that is their own, free from the influence of external chaos. Their thoughts are clear, their emotions are stable, and their energy is preserved. They do not waste mental strength on unnecessary reactions. They do not carry the burdens of others. They do not allow negativity to take root in their minds. They stand firm, steady, in a world that constantly shifts. And in that steadiness, they find a level of mental strength that nothing can shake. Maintaining control over external influences protects the mind from unnecessary negativity. But true mastery of inner dialogue requires more than mental awareness. It demands a connection to the body. The mind is not separate from physical movement. Every thought, every emotion, every internal struggle is reflected in the body, and the way the body moves directly impacts the way the mind operates. The Stoics understood this deeply. They did not view the body as something to be ignored in pursuit of intellectual strength, but as a necessary component of mental clarity. A mind that is constantly trapped in thought without physical engagement becomes restless, unbalanced, and prone to over-analysis. But a mind that moves with intention gains stability, discipline, and control. The connection between movement and thought is often overlooked. Most people believe that regulating emotions is purely a mental exercise, something achieved through willpower or reflection alone. But the nervous system doesn't function in isolation. When the body is stagnant, energy builds up without an outlet. This excess energy manifests as anxiety, tension, and uncontrolled thought loops. It creates the conditions for overthinking, making small problems feel insurmountable and amplifying emotional reactions. Physical movement acts as a release valve, allowing the body to discharge built-up stress before it translates into mental distress. The Stoics place great value on physical discipline not just for health, but for its effect on the mind. They understood that controlled movement reinforced controlled thinking. They engaged in physical training not for vanity or athleticism, but because they recognized that a strong body contributed to a strong mind. They knew that when the body was weak, the mind followed, becoming sluggish, reactive, and undisciplined. But when the body was pushed, the mind adapted, learning resilience, patience, and endurance. Physical movement was not just an act of health, it was an act of mental conditioning. One of the most immediate effects of movement is its impact on internal dialogue. When the body is engaged in motion, the mind is forced into the present. It cannot spiral endlessly into worry or self-doubt, because movement demands focus. This is why people often feel clarity after a walk or a workout. Their thoughts align, their emotions stabilize, and problems that once felt overwhelming suddenly appear manageable. The act of moving forces the brain to break out of its repetitive cycles, shifting attention from passive rumination to active engagement. Physical movement also regulates stress hormones. When the body is sedentary, stress accumulates, leading to increased cortisol levels, heightened anxiety, and emotional instability. The body reacts as if it is trapped, interpreting stillness as a sign of danger. But when movement is introduced, the nervous system resets. Stress is metabolized, cortisol levels decrease, and the brain releases neurotransmitters that create calm and focus. This physiological shift has a direct impact on self-talk. A person who moves regularly will find that their thoughts become clearer, more solution-oriented, and less prone to negativity. Another critical factor is the role of posture in shaping internal dialogue. The way the body is positioned affects the way the mind perceives itself. A slouched posture with collapsed shoulders sends signals of weakness and defeat to the brain, reinforcing self-doubt and insecurity. But standing upright, moving with purpose and holding strong posture changes the brain's chemistry. Confidence increases, thoughts become more decisive, and internal dialogue shifts from hesitation to conviction. The Stoics practiced maintaining composure in their physical stance, knowing that the way they carried themselves influenced their ability to think clearly under pressure. Rhythmic movement also plays a role in regulating thought. Activities like running, walking, and repetitive physical tasks create a synchronization between the body and mind, allowing thoughts to process in a structured way rather than in chaotic bursts. This is why many great thinkers, including Stoic philosophers, relied on walking as a method of problem-solving. The act of moving at a steady pace allows the mind to untangle complex ideas, organize emotions, and make sense of internal conflicts without force or frustration. Physical exertion also teaches resilience. The mind often seeks comfort, avoiding difficulty and challenge. But the body, when pushed beyond its perceived limits, reveals an important truth. The limits of the mind are largely self-imposed. A person who trains themselves to endure discomfort in movement also trains themselves to endure discomfort in thought. They learn to push through mental fatigue, to persist through uncertainty, and to override self-doubt with action. The Stoics saw this as an essential practice. They engaged in physical hardship not for suffering's sake, but to cultivate the ability to remain composed under stress. Another powerful aspect of movement is its ability to override fear. The body holds on to emotions, storing tension from past experiences. This physical tension keeps the mind locked in outdated fears, preventing growth and action. But movement, particularly strength training, endurance challenges, or dynamic motion, releases these stored emotions. It allows the mind to move forward rather than remaining stuck in old patterns. This is why many people feel a mental breakthrough after intense physical effort, because movement dissolves the physical residue of past struggles, creating space for new thought patterns. Physical activity also strengthens the connection between discipline and self-respect. A person who commits to movement consistently builds trust in themselves. They develop proof of their own reliability, reinforcing the belief that they are capable of following through on their intentions. This directly affects self-talk. The mind no longer questions its own strength because it has physical evidence of perseverance. The Stoics knew that self-discipline was not an abstract concept. It was a daily practice, reinforced through action. Another reason movement is essential for mental regulation is its impact on decision-making. A stagnant body leads to a stagnant mind. When the body remains inactive, thoughts become sluggish, indecisive, and unclear. But when movement is introduced, mental sharpness increases. Blood flow to the brain improves, cognitive function accelerates, and decisions become more precise. The Stoics trained themselves to make decisions based on logic rather than emotion, and movement reinforced this ability by keeping the mind alert and engaged rather than passive and reactive. The role of movement in regulating self-talk is also evident in its effect on momentum. When action is taken, even in small ways, it creates an internal shift. A mind that was once resistant to change begins to adapt. The inertia of stillness is broken, and confidence builds. The more consistently the body moves, the less resistance the mind has to new challenges. The Stoics saw movement as a way to create inner momentum, ensuring that they were not held back by hesitation or uncertainty. Movement also influences breathing, which in turn affects emotional stability. Shallow, erratic breathing fuels stress and anxiety, making internal dialogue frantic and reactive. But deep, controlled breathing during physical activity calms the nervous system, creating mental clarity and composure. The Stoics practiced breath control as a way to maintain steadiness under pressure, using the breath as a bridge between physical control and mental discipline. A structured approach to movement also prevents emotional stagnation. Many people find themselves trapped in recurring moods, stress, frustration, sadness, because their energy has no outlet. The Stoics understood that emotions, like physical states, must be managed actively. They did not allow themselves to be controlled by emotion any more than they allowed themselves to be controlled by physical weakness. They trained both, ensuring that neither dictated their actions without reason. The integration of movement into daily life does not require extreme physical effort. Small, deliberate actions create significant change. A short walk after deep thinking, a physical task to break a negative thought cycle, an intentional breath to reset the mind. Each of these reinforces control. The Stoics were not interested in unnecessary complexity. They sought efficiency in action. They moved with purpose, knowing that a well-regulated body created a well-regulated mind. A person who understands the power of movement in shaping internal dialogue no longer allows their mind to be controlled by passive thoughts. They do not wait for motivation. They create it through action. They do not allow hesitation to take root. They override it through movement. They do not allow emotions to spiral unchecked. They direct them through physical discipline. They develop a body that supports their mind rather than weakens it. They reinforce mental strength with physical action. They train themselves to move through life with intention rather than reaction. And in doing so, they break free from the limitations of thought alone. They gain clarity, resilience, and a self-discipline that extends far beyond physical movement. They cultivate a mind that does not waver, a body that does not resist, and an inner voice that speaks with unwavering confidence. A disciplined mind, strengthened through movement, gains control over thoughts during the day. But night presents a different challenge. When the world slows down and distractions fade, the mind often does the opposite. It speeds up. Thoughts that were manageable in daylight become magnified. Problems that felt small now seem urgent. The mind, left unchecked, turns into a restless machine, creating anxiety, doubt, and endless loops of overanalysis. This is the battle of late-night chatter, the relentless noise that keeps sleep out of reach and turns rest into struggle. Those who do not master this fight find themselves drained, mentally exhausted before the next day even begins. A mind that cannot quiet itself at night is a mind that is untrained in detachment. When thoughts continue racing, it is not because they are important, it is because the brain has been conditioned to remain active. The Stoics understood that the ability to control thoughts did not end when the sun set. They trained themselves to command their minds at all times, recognizing that peace was not something that happened by chance. It was something that had to be cultivated deliberately. One of the main reasons overthinking intensifies at night is the lack of sensory input. During the day, external noise keeps the mind occupied. Conversations, movement, and tasks create a natural rhythm that prevents thoughts from spiraling. But at night, when silence sets in, unresolved thoughts rise to the surface. Without distractions, the brain turns inward, replaying past events, constructing future scenarios, and analyzing everything that remains incomplete. The key to stopping this is not distraction, but regulation, teaching the mind to transition from stimulation to stillness rather than continuing its momentum unchecked. The nervous system does not shift from high activity to rest instantly. If the body and mind have been engaged in intense thought, stress, or action during the day, that momentum does not disappear when lying down. It carries into the night, making it impossible to switch off. This is why those who go straight from stimulation, screens, work, conversations, into bed find themselves struggling to sleep. Their minds are still active, running on the energy of the previous hours. The solution is creating a deliberate slowdown. The Stoics practiced preparing for rest, recognizing that the mind must be led into sleep, not forced. One of the most powerful techniques to counteract nighttime overthinking is pre-sleep journaling. The mind replays thoughts because it fears losing them. It holds on to unfinished ideas, unresolved problems, and unprocessed emotions, keeping them active as a way to maintain control. But when thoughts are written down before bed, the mind is given permission to release them. They are no longer scattered. They have been externalized, documented, and acknowledged. This simple act of transferring thoughts from the mind to paper signals the brain that it does not need to keep them active. Another way to interrupt racing thoughts is through controlled breathing. The body and mind are linked, and an overactive mind often coincides with shallow, erratic breathing. By slowing the breath, the nervous system shifts from a state of alertness to relaxation. The Stoics understood the power of breath in controlling emotional states. They trained themselves to breathe with intention, knowing that a calm breath creates a calm mind. This practice becomes especially important at night when the goal is to move from mental activity to stillness. Another reason late-night chatter persists is the association between bed and overthinking. If a person repeatedly experiences racing thoughts in bed, the brain forms a connection. Lying down becomes a trigger for mental activity rather than rest. The longer this cycle continues, the stronger the association becomes. To break it, movement must be introduced. If thoughts begin racing, instead of lying there struggling against them, getting up and engaging in a simple, calming activity resets the pattern. This might be reading something non-stimulating, writing down lingering thoughts, or practicing slow breathing. The key is to avoid reinforcing the habit of thinking excessively while in bed. The content of nighttime overthinking is often exaggerated. Thoughts that arise in the silence of night tend to be more extreme than those during the day. Small worries become catastrophic, minor concerns feel overwhelming, and self-doubt becomes amplified. This happens because the brain processes thoughts differently when fatigued. The Stoics trained themselves to question their thoughts, not accepting them at face value. They asked, "Is this true? Is this rational? Will this matter tomorrow?" This practice can be applied at night. When thoughts feel urgent, instead of engaging with them, questioning them removes their power. Exposure to light before sleep also plays a role in overthinking. The brain is wired to associate darkness with rest, but modern artificial light disrupts this signal. Bright screens and overhead lighting trick the brain into staying alert, delaying the production of melatonin, the hormone that signals sleep. The Stoics lived in alignment with natural rhythms, adjusting their activity according to the time of day. Adapting this principle means reducing bright light exposure in the hour before sleep, allowing the brain to naturally shift into a state of rest rather than fighting against artificial stimulation. Another technique for handling nighttime overthinking is mental redirection. The mind spirals because it is given space to do so. Instead of allowing it to run in circles, guiding it toward a structured thought process prevents chaotic thinking. The Stoics used visualization as a tool for mental control. At night, this can be applied by focusing on structured imagery, mentally walking through a familiar, peaceful location, recalling specific moments of gratitude, or focusing on slow, intentional thought patterns rather than free-flowing worry. The environment also plays a critical role in mental state. A space that is cluttered, noisy, or uncomfortable creates subconscious stress. The Stoics valued simplicity, understanding that external chaos leads to internal disorder. A bedroom that is free of distractions, optimized for comfort, and associated with relaxation rather than mental activity, reinforces a smoother transition into sleep. Those who struggle with nighttime overthinking often find that making physical adjustments to their sleeping environment has an immediate impact on their ability to quiet the mind. The tendency to overthink at night is also linked to unresolved emotional weight. The brain processes emotions differently in moments of stillness, bringing up feelings that were ignored or suppressed during the day. This is why people often feel an emotional flood when trying to sleep. Instead of suppressing these emotions further, addressing them earlier in the day prevents them from resurfacing at night. The Stoics did not avoid emotions. They examined them, processed them, and determined their true significance. Those who practice this during the day experience less emotional turbulence when they lie down at night. Sleep is not just about resting the body, it's about allowing the mind to reset. A mind that remains in constant activity, even at night, never gets the chance to recover. This is why chronic overthinkers often feel exhausted even after hours in bed. Their minds never fully disengage, leaving them in a constant state of low-level stress. The Stoics approached sleep as a necessity for strength, ensuring that their mental discipline carried through into the night. Another reason nighttime overthinking persists is the habit of mentally rehearsing worst-case scenarios. The mind defaults to imagining potential failures, replaying regrets, and constructing anxiety-inducing situations. The Stoics trained themselves to counter this with logical analysis. They asked, "What is the worst that could happen? Can I handle it? If so, why am I worrying? If not, what action can I take?" Applying this at night shifts the mind from passive worry to active resolution, weakening the grip of anxiety. The connection between physical activity and sleep quality is another factor in controlling nighttime thoughts. A body that has not expended enough energy during the day is more likely to experience restless sleep. The Stoics believed in physical movement as a way to maintain mental stability, recognizing that a body in motion supports a mind at peace. Those who incorporate consistent physical exertion into their routine find that their ability to transition into sleep improves, reducing the likelihood of overactive thoughts. Handling late-night chatter is not about eliminating thoughts altogether. It is about creating a structured, intentional approach to mental transition. The Stoics did not expect the mind to be empty, but they refused to let it be chaotic. They trained themselves to direct their thoughts, to command their internal state rather than be controlled by it. A person who masters this skill does not lie awake, drowning in unnecessary thought loops. They do not allow small worries to dominate their night. They do not waste energy battling their own mind. Instead, they enter rest with composure, trusting that they are in control of their thoughts rather than the other way around. And when they wake, they are not exhausted from mental turmoil. They rise clear-headed, steady, and ready to engage with life on their own terms, free from the weight of a restless mind. Mastering nighttime thoughts strengthens the ability to disengage from unnecessary worry. But resilience is not just about preventing overthinking. It is about preparing for adversity before it arrives. A mind that waits for difficulty to strike before attempting to cope is a mind that will always be caught off guard. Strength is not built in the moment of crisis. It is forged in the preparation beforehand. The Stoics did not believe in blind optimism or the false comfort of hoping everything would go well. Instead, they trained their minds to confront difficulty before it happened, ensuring that when hardship came, they would not be overwhelmed. The practice of visualization was central to this philosophy. They did not leave their reactions to chance. They mentally walked through failure, rejection, loss, and hardship long before these events took place. By doing so, they weakened fear, eliminated hesitation, and ensured that no challenge could truly surprise them. A person who has already rehearsed how to endure pain does not crumble when pain arrives. A mind that has already accepted loss does not fall apart when something is taken away. Those who wait until adversity comes to develop mental resilience will always be at its mercy. But those who train themselves in advance gain an advantage that few possess: the ability to stand firm no matter what happens. One of the most powerful techniques used by the Stoics was premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of misfortune. This was not about pessimism or dwelling on negative possibilities. It was about conditioning the mind to expect hardship so that when it arrived, it had no power. Most people live in fear of what could go wrong. They avoid thinking about failure, betrayal, or suffering because the mere thought of these things is uncomfortable. But ignoring difficulty does not make it less likely. It only ensures that when it arrives, it will feel unbearable. The Stoics understood that fear thrives in avoidance. By looking directly at the worst-case scenario, they stripped it of its ability to control them. This practice is one of the greatest shields against anxiety. Most worry stems from uncertainty, the fear of what might happen, and the belief that it will be too difficult to handle. But a mind that has already visualized the challenge, already walked through the possible outcomes, and already determined how to respond, does not experience this level of uncertainty. It does not waste energy resisting what might happen, because it has already made peace with every possibility. Instead of reacting in panic, it responds with clarity. Stoic visualization does not just prepare the mind for hardship, it strengthens confidence. A person who mentally rehearses overcoming obstacles builds a deep belief in their own ability. The brain does not fully distinguish between real experience and vividly imagined scenarios. This means that by repeatedly visualizing themselves responding with strength and composure, a person builds the same neural pathways as if they had actually faced those situations in reality. This is why elite athletes, military strategists, and high-level performers use visualization as a core part of training. They do not leave their responses to chance. They see themselves succeeding before they even begin, programming their minds to execute under pressure. This practice also removes hesitation. Many failures are not due to lack of ability, but lack of preparation. A person who does not mentally prepare for a challenge often freezes when faced with it. Their mind is caught between uncertainty and reaction, unsure of how to proceed. But those who have visualized the moment in advance move forward without delay. Their brain already knows the next step because it has seen it before. They've rehearsed the worst and planned their response. This makes action immediate and decisive, rather than slow and uncertain. Another reason visualization is powerful is that it redefines the way the mind perceives adversity. Most people see difficulty as an interruption to their plans, something unfair that should not be happening. But the Stoics saw hardship as an expected part of life, something to be faced with purpose rather than resisted with frustration. By visualizing struggle beforehand, they shifted their perspective from avoidance to acceptance. They did not see obstacles as things that stood in their way, but as necessary challenges to be overcome. This mental shift made them immune to victimhood and self-pity. This technique is not only useful for preparing for major life challenges, but also for handling daily struggles. Small moments of frustration, minor setbacks, and unexpected difficulties can all be anticipated through visualization. By mentally preparing for these situations in advance, emotional reactions are reduced. The person who has already accepted that there will be delays, interruptions, or misunderstandings does not react with anger when they occur. They have already seen these moments in their mind and have decided how they will handle them. Another key benefit of Stoic visualization is its ability to eliminate the fear of loss. Much suffering comes not from actual loss, but from attachment to what might be taken away. People fear losing relationships, status, health, or material possessions because they have never mentally prepared for life without them. But when loss is visualized repeatedly, its power diminishes. The Stoics reminded themselves daily that everything they had was temporary. They walked through the experience of losing their comfort, their wealth, even their own lives. By doing this, they ensured that if those things were taken from them, they would not be paralyzed by grief or fear. Visualization also plays a crucial role in emotional regulation. When a difficult situation arises, emotions take over before logic has time to engage. But those who have already visualized the moment in advance do not get swept away by emotional impulses. Their mind has already determined the correct response, making them less susceptible to reactive anger, frustration, or panic. This is why the Stoics remained composed under stress. They were not naturally immune to emotion. They had simply trained themselves to process it before it could take control. Another powerful aspect of this practice is its ability to reinforce identity. A person who visualizes themselves acting with wisdom, patience, and discipline builds a stronger sense of self. The way they see themselves in their mind influences the way they behave in reality. If they repeatedly picture themselves losing control, they reinforce weakness. But if they consistently see themselves responding with strength, they reinforce resilience. This is why the Stoics were relentless in shaping their internal narratives. They did not allow their minds to wander aimlessly through fear or doubt. They deliberately structured their thoughts to align with the person they wanted to become. This technique also works as a tool for motivation. The brain does not like uncertainty, and many people procrastinate or avoid challenges simply because they do not know what to expect. But when an experience is visualized beforehand, the mind becomes more comfortable with it. This reduces hesitation and makes taking action feel more natural. The Stoics did not wait until they felt ready. They created readiness through mental rehearsal. Training the mind through visualization is not about wishful thinking or false optimism. It is not about pretending that hardship will not happen, but about making sure it does not break you when it does. It's about ensuring that when difficulty arises, there is no panic, no hesitation, no loss of control, only a calm mind that has already seen this moment and knows exactly how to handle it. A person who practices this skill consistently does not fear the future. They do not waste energy on anxiety about the unknown because they have already walked through every possibility in their mind. They don't crumble under pressure because they have already rehearsed their strength. They don't allow difficulty to dictate their emotions because they have already chosen their response long before the moment arrives. And when adversity comes, they do not flinch. They do not waver. They do not break, because they have already lived through it in their mind, and they are ready. Building resilience through visualization strengthens the ability to navigate adversity, but even the most disciplined mind faces a modern challenge that the Stoics never encountered: the influence of social media. The mind is no longer just shaped by personal experiences, real-life conversations, or natural observations. It is now constantly absorbing information from an endless stream of digital noise, much of it designed to manipulate thought, trigger emotions, and weaken mental discipline. The inner voice, once an internal guide shaped by reason and reflection, is now hijacked by external forces that dictate what to think, how to feel, and where to focus attention. Most people do not realize how deeply social media shapes their perception of themselves and the world around them. A single scroll through a feed can shift an entire mood, create insecurities, and plant seeds of comparison. Posts, comments, and headlines dictate what deserves attention, what is urgent, and what is worth worrying about. The Stoics trained themselves to control their thoughts, but the digital world is structured to make this nearly impossible. Every platform is designed to capture attention, keeping the mind engaged in constant stimulation, never allowing for true mental stillness. The greatest danger of social media is not just wasted time, but the gradual erosion of independent thought. The inner voice, once personal and reflective, becomes an echo of external opinions. Beliefs are no longer formed through deep contemplation, but through exposure to repeated narratives. Ideas are accepted not because they are logically examined, but because they are constantly reinforced by likes, shares, and trending discussions. The mind becomes reactive rather than intentional, absorbing without questioning, responding without analyzing. Comparison is one of the most destructive aspects of social media. The Stoics taught that suffering is often self-inflicted, rooted not in reality, but in perception. When people measure their lives against carefully curated online images, dissatisfaction grows. They see achievements, wealth, relationships, and happiness displayed without flaws, creating the illusion that their own life is lacking. This fuels an internal dialogue of inadequacy, leading to self-doubt and diminished confidence. What was once a natural, personal sense of progress becomes distorted by false comparisons to digital personas that do not reflect reality. The addiction to validation further weakens inner stability. Social media operates on reinforcement loops, where likes, comments, and reactions serve as artificial rewards. The brain begins to associate self-worth with external approval, making confidence fragile and dependent on digital feedback. The Stoics believed in developing self-sufficiency, ensuring that one's value was determined by internal principles rather than external recognition. But social media reverses this, conditioning the mind to seek constant reassurance from others, creating a cycle where self-esteem is never truly stable. Another major issue is the overstimulation of the mind. The constant influx of information prevents deep thinking, making the brain accustomed to quick, shallow processing rather than focused contemplation. The ability to sit in silence, to reflect deeply, to analyze thoughts with patience, all of these are eroded by a world that demands instant reactions. The Stoics valued solitude and reflection, knowing that wisdom is developed in stillness. But social media ensures that stillness is rare, keeping the mind in a state of constant distraction. Social media also distorts emotional regulation. Exposure to outrage, fear, and divisive discussions trains the brain to react impulsively rather than respond with reason. The Stoics emphasized emotional control, recognizing that external events do not dictate inner peace unless they are allowed to. But social media thrives on emotional triggers. It fuels anger, anxiety, and tribal thinking, making it difficult to maintain the Stoic practice of detachment. The more time spent absorbing these influences, the harder it becomes to remain mentally strong. Another hidden consequence of social media is the loss of genuine human connection. The illusion of constant interaction through messages, posts, and updates replaces meaningful face-to-face relationships. The Stoics understood that true connection is built through presence, through real conversations, through shared experiences. But the digital world replaces depth with quantity, creating interactions that are shallow and unfulfilling. The more people engage online, the lonelier they often become, as real-world relationships are neglected in favor of virtual ones. Mental fatigue from social media is another problem that few acknowledge. The brain is not designed to process the level of input that digital platforms provide. The endless consumption of updates, opinions, and news creates exhaustion, leaving little mental energy for personal growth, creativity, or meaningful reflection. The Stoics believed in conserving mental energy for what truly matters, but social media ensures that this energy is scattered, constantly pulled in multiple directions, making focused thought increasingly difficult. Breaking free from the control of social media does not require complete disconnection, but disciplined use. The Stoics did not advocate avoiding life's challenges, but mastering them through control and intentionality. Applying this to social media means creating clear boundaries, choosing when, how, and why to engage, rather than allowing platforms to dictate behavior. It means questioning information rather than accepting it passively, limiting exposure to negativity, and ensuring that digital interactions serve a purpose rather than becoming a compulsive habit. Developing a stronger inner voice in the age of social media requires deliberate mental training. The mind must be reconditioned to think independently, to resist the pull of comparison, and to detach from the need for external validation. This involves replacing passive scrolling with active learning, reducing time spent consuming content that does not contribute to personal growth, and cultivating habits that reinforce self-discipline. The Stoics understood that mental freedom is not given. It is earned through daily practice, through conscious effort, through the refusal to be controlled by external forces. The ability to maintain a strong mind in the digital age is rare. Most people allow their thoughts, emotions, and focus to be dictated by algorithms designed to keep them engaged. They consume rather than create, react rather than reflect, compare rather than cultivate self-worth. But those who apply Stoic principles to their digital lives regain control. They do not allow their inner voice to be drowned out by external noise. They do not let social media define their identity or shape their emotions. They use technology as a tool rather than being used by it. A person who masters this skill does not wake up anxious, reaching for their phone before even getting out of bed. They do not spend their time caught in endless scrolling, absorbing the carefully curated highlights of others' lives. They do not allow digital validation to determine their self-worth. They do not engage in pointless debates that drain energy and create frustration. They do not let fear, outrage, or comparison dictate their emotional state. Instead, they use their time with purpose. They think before they react. They protect their focus. They maintain control over their emotions and do not allow external influences to pull them in directions they did not choose. They train their minds to remain clear, strong, and resilient, even in a world designed to weaken attention and disrupt inner peace. They do not waste their mental energy on distractions that add no value. They cultivate habits that strengthen their mind rather than deplete it. They recognize that technology is a tool, but like any tool, it must be used with discipline. The Stoics mastered their thoughts in an era without digital distractions, but their principles apply now more than ever. Those who apply them in the modern world gain an advantage that few possess: the ability to think freely, to remain unaffected by external noise, and to maintain an inner voice that is their own, unshaken, unwavering, and entirely under their control. Mastering external influences ensures that the mind is not hijacked by the distractions of the digital world, but true mental discipline is built from within. A strong inner voice is not something people are born with. It is something they create, refine, and reinforce over time. The mind is always speaking, always guiding, always shaping thoughts. But most people allow this voice to develop without intention. They absorb the fears, doubts, and limitations of others, allowing their internal dialogue to become a reflection of external negativity rather than a source of strength. The greatest performers, the most disciplined minds, and the strongest individuals in history did not leave their inner voice to chance. They designed it, controlled it, and trained it to serve them rather than sabotage them. The difference between those who break through limitations and those who remain stuck is not just physical ability, intelligence, or luck. It is the voice they listen to in moments of struggle. The inner dialogue of a champion does not sound like the voice of someone who quits. It does not entertain excuses, self-doubt, or hesitation. It does not seek comfort. It commands action. It pushes forward when everything else wants to stop. It does not beg for motivation. It creates it. Rafael Nadal, one of the greatest tennis players of all time, is known for his relentless mental discipline. His inner voice is not one of arrogance or entitlement. It is one of unwavering focus and self-command. During high-pressure matches, when exhaustion sets in and the body begins to fail, he does not allow his mind to spiral into doubt. His inner voice repeats simple, deliberate commands, 1 point at a time. Fight for every ball. Stay in the moment. He does not let emotions take over. He does not think about the past or worry about the future. His mind remains locked into the present, guiding him with precision rather than panic. David Goggins, known for his extreme mental toughness, took control of his inner voice by refusing to accept weakness as an identity. His mind, once filled with self-doubt, transformed into one of the most unbreakable forces in existence. He did not wait for a strong inner dialogue to appear. He built it through brutal self-discipline. When pain set in, his inner voice did not seek relief. It demanded more. When failure loomed, his mind did not allow surrender. It created the next step forward. His ability to push past suffering, to go beyond the limits of what the body and mind say is possible, comes entirely from his ability to control the words he speaks to himself. The Stoics understood that internal dialogue is the foundation of all action. Marcus Aurelius, one of history's greatest leaders, constantly trained his mind to reject unnecessary emotion, to silence reactive thoughts and to replace them with reason. His personal writings reveal a constant battle with the mind, a deliberate effort to command his own thinking. He did not allow frustration to control him. He did not let fear dictate his choices. He reshaped his thoughts before they could become obstacles. His inner voice was not a source of comfort. It was a source of direction, reminding him of what mattered and discarding everything else. Developing an inner voice that works in your favor requires breaking the habit of passive thought. Most people allow their minds to run unchecked, listening to every negative whisper, every excuse, every doubt, as if it were truth. They do not filter their thoughts. They accept whatever their mind tells them without question. But those who develop mental strength challenge every thought before allowing it to take root. They do not entertain weakness. They do not engage in endless self-pity. They do not repeat narratives of failure. They correct their thinking in real time, replacing unhelpful thoughts with commands that serve their goals. Repetition is the foundation of a strong inner voice. Just as physical strength is built through repeated effort, mental strength is built through repeated self-talk. The words spoken to oneself daily, in moments of difficulty, in times of doubt, shape identity. A person who constantly tells themselves they are incapable, unlucky, or stuck reinforces those beliefs until they become reality. But a person who trains their inner voice to repeat words of resilience, effort, and control will act in alignment with those thoughts. The mind follows the instructions it is given most often. Clarity is another essential component of a powerful inner voice. The Stoics rejected vague thinking, knowing that a mind that wanders in uncertainty becomes weak. Their internal dialogue was direct, logical, and focused only on what mattered. They did not indulge in endless emotional analysis. They did not waste time questioning their own capability. They trained their minds to speak in a way that reinforced action. A strong inner voice doesn't dwell in confusion. It provides clear instructions, cutting through distractions and directing energy toward the next step. Building an inner voice that works in your favor also requires eliminating useless mental chatter. Many people allow their minds to be filled with commentary that serves no purpose. Endless replays of past failures, worries about things they cannot control, self-criticism that leads nowhere. The Stoics did not allow this. They filtered every thought, ensuring that only those aligned with their values and goals were given space. Those who take control of their internal dialogue must do the same, rejecting thoughts that add no value, removing mental noise, and ensuring that their mind is a source of strength rather than confusion. Emotional regulation is another key aspect of inner dialogue mastery. A person who allows emotions to dictate their internal voice will never achieve stability. They will find their thoughts shifting with every mood, controlled by external events rather than internal principles. The Stoics trained themselves to maintain consistency in their thinking, ensuring that their internal dialogue did not change based on temporary emotions. They spoke to themselves with the same discipline in success as they did in failure. They did not let feelings determine their identity. A high-performing mind also understands the importance of reframing. When something difficult arises, the average person's inner voice reacts with frustration, avoidance, or self-doubt. But those who have trained themselves correctly immediately shift perspective. Instead of seeing a setback as a failure, they see it as proof of progress. Instead of viewing discomfort as suffering, they view it as growth. Their minds are programmed to extract strength from every situation rather than to collapse under difficulty. Another critical element in shaping a powerful inner voice is learning to detach from impulse. A weak mind reacts to every thought that arises, but a disciplined mind steps back, observes, and decides which thoughts deserve attention. The Stoics trained themselves to be indifferent to fleeting emotions, knowing that not every feeling was worth engaging with. They created distance between thought and reaction, allowing reason to lead rather than impulse. The strongest minds in history did not develop their internal dialogue by accident. They built it intentionally, training it with the same discipline as the body. They did not allow their minds to work against them. They ensured that every word spoken within their own head reinforced their ability to act, to endure, and to push beyond limits. A person who takes control of their inner voice gains an advantage that few ever achieve. They do not talk themselves out of difficult tasks. They do not sabotage themselves with doubt. They do not let weakness dictate their behavior. Their thoughts align with their goals. Their words drive action rather than hesitation. Their internal dialogue becomes a force that pushes them forward rather than a weight that holds them back. And when challenges arise, when exhaustion sets in, when everything inside wants to quit, their mind does not betray them. It does not make excuses. It does not complain. It does not seek an easy way out. It speaks only one message: keep going. And that is why they succeed where others stop. Your inner voice is either your greatest weapon or your biggest weakness. Every thought, every whisper in your mind is shaping your future, determining whether you rise or whether you stay stuck. The weak let their thoughts control them. The strong take control of their thoughts. This is the foundation of mental strength, the ability to silence doubt, to reframe failure, to detach from negativity, and to command the mind with absolute discipline. This is not something that happens overnight. It is trained, refined, and sharpened every single day. It is built through detachment from destructive emotions, through the power of visualization, through the discipline of physical movement, and through the intentional shaping of your internal dialogue. It is reinforced by rejecting external distractions, filtering out noise, and ensuring that no thought enters your mind without being tested for its value. The Stoics understood that control over the mind meant control over life. They did not wait for peace, they created it. They did not wait for motivation, they forged it. They did not allow emotions, people, or circumstances to dictate their reality. They were the masters of their own inner world. And that is what separates those who thrive from those who suffer. The ability to stand firm in a world full of distractions, self-doubt, and negativity. The ability to command the mind instead of being enslaved by it. You have everything you need to start. The choice is now yours. Let your inner voice work for you, not against you. Build it with intention, train it with discipline, and never let it be the reason you hold yourself back. Now, let's hear from you. What is one change you're making today to take control of your inner dialogue? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. And if you found value in this, subscribe to the channel. Your mind is your greatest asset. Train it like it matters, because it does.